Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku had unexpected heroes. If you guys enjoy this movie, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story lyzarien from fanfiction. So let's start the video. Izuku's feet took a shaky first step, but then continued to move decisively. Between sobs and efforts to wipe his face with the sleeves of his school uniform, he told himself that he already knew. He had known it for years, but until that moment he had kept a tiny little hope inside of him. The sky was blue and a gentle breeze was blowing around them. Furthermore, that day she had met the hero she admired the most. She had personally saved his life and had his autograph, so it wasn't so bad, she told herself, trying to force a smile, getting closer and closer to the edge of the roof. Why had he met All Might? Had it really been a coincidence, or had it been destiny? Maybe to avoid more suffering, so that she will forget to follow a path that would eventually end fatally. All Might had just confirmed that his dream was just that, an unrealistic dream. And she understood well what she told him. She really understood it and she was grateful, but he had been too hard to listen to. He knew he couldn't be a hero without a gift. I already knew that, but still. On his last step into the void, Deku closed his eyes, trying to force a smile, and his right foot remained suspended for what seemed like an eternity before he began to fall. He didn't know why All Might had to leave so quickly a few moments ago. Maybe if she had stayed with him a little longer, he wouldn't have felt so alone. He continued to fall, and in an instant he saw several fragments of his life. Like when his mother hugged him when he was 4 years old, telling him that she was sorry between cries. His 5-year-old little self, stifling tears behind his bedroom door while his parents argued in the living room about something he no longer remembered. Then to his father, closing the door behind him and his mother holding him tightly so that he wouldn't follow him. Surely that was why All Might's words had destroyed him so much, because ever since his father was gone, in Izuku's mind, All Might had been the closest thing to a father figure he had ever had. Izuku winced in pain. At ground level, someone else's feet began a race, quickly touching their shoes and jumping in Izuku's direction, dropping his school briefcase. In Izuku's mind, the most recent memories of the day began to appear. क़açin pushing him straight to the ground, telling him that he was useless. क़açin destroying and throwing his notebook out of the window. Himself being trapped and suffocated by that mud monster. And finally to All Might, with his imposing, muscular back, apparently wiping a small scratch at the corner of his mouth, jumping off the roof and saying goodbye with a small wave of his hand. 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝐿. The sudden scream made Izuku open his eyes. Still falling and upside down, she saw a girl reaching out with all her strength to try to reach him. In slow motion he thought he saw that 4 fingers were already touching her hand, and opening his eyes wide he realized what she was. It was in one of his hero analysis notebooks. Whatever his quirk was, he had to touch it with all 5 fingers for it to take effect. It was crazy for him to think about those kinds of details at a time like this, but at least it managed to distract him a little from his current situation, without thinking about it. And perhaps also because of the effort the girl was making to touch him, Izuku moved his little finger to complete the union of the 5 fingers, and it seemed to him that something changed immediately. Suddenly he found himself less than 2 meters from the ground and kicked headfirst into the air, not knowing what to do now. The girl continued making a face of effort, closing her eyes tightly and joining the fingers of both hands until she couldn't take it anymore. Izuku fell first and then the girl on top of him, rubbing his head a little, but reacting almost immediately. The girl moved away from him a little to look directly into his face. It seemed to Izuku that she looked surprised upon seeing him closer, but breaking away from that initial reaction, she looked at him with renewed concern. "Geez, are you okay?" Izuku tried to formulate without much success and trying to back away to separate himself a little, first of all, ashamed of what he had tried to do and a little because of the girl's close face. However, when he tried to stand up, he was mortified by a sharp pain in his leg. They both instantly noticed the strange angle that his right leg had acquired, as a result of not having been able to fall properly. Izuku paled completely. She covered her mouth to hold back a scream. The image of the young woman who had saved him was lost in the darkness until he lost consciousness. 𝗧𝗏𝗏 tried to call for help from the passers-by passing by, still leaning over the unconscious green-haired boy, but they all seemed to be quickly heading in another direction. "Excuse me." I caught the attention of a man who was talking on his cell phone and who looked agitated. Could I call an ambulance from his cell phone? The man seemed to pay little attention to 𝗧𝗏𝗏, but fortunately he pointed out that several ambulances were already parked on the corner. "How convenient. What's going on?" she asked, not understanding why people were still rushing in that direction. "The boy has been trapped by a slime and mud monster. There are already several heroes in the place, but apparently none of them have the correct quirk to fight it, deciding not to worry about it at the moment." 𝗧𝗏𝗏 again touched the green-haired boy to make him levitate and hurriedly carried him in her arms to one of the ambulances. From 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝐻's point of view, there were many heroes around him, trying to harm that disgusting slime monster that was suffocating him little by little. But they seemed so weak and incompetent. He couldn't believe those idiots called themselves pro-heroes. She closed her eyes tightly and her tears unintentionally overflowed. She reminded that idiot Deku that she always seemed to want to help others, but he lacked the strength to do so. She always crying but with her fists up. Those were the kind of people who always died needlessly first. She made him angry. Pathetic. Pathetic. She wanted to scream without completely succeeding. Pathetic, said one of those present, as he leaned over the wall to cough up blood. I have to. A hand on his shoulder caught All Might's attention in his least favorable version. And when he saw who it was, he tried to smile by clenching his teeth. Help is on the way, so don't force it anymore. It's not good for you, said 𝗧𝗵𝗲, the city's police chief. 3 luminous red dots appeared above the monster. And when the closest heroes noticed this, they quickly backed away, trying to get the crowd to do the same. On the other side of the wall, 3 armored agents rappelled down using flamethrowers, which effectively made the monster writhe. Still trapped, 𝗵𝘃𝗀 felt himself sweating from the heat of the flamethrowers, while the pressure on his arms was released a little. Then he saw his opportunity. With a malicious smile, he opened his palms and sparks began to emerge. No, I won't forgive you. Never. 𝗵𝑈ERE. Go dead. Everyone present repeated with amazement. A large explosion emerged from the alley into the sky, illuminating everything around it for an instant. Then large pieces of mud began to fall, but the monster no longer moved. He's very strong, the police chief acknowledged, while All Might watched him without words. When he opened his eyes, the first thing Izuku saw was All Might, although of course, in an action figure on the shelf in front of his bed. It had all been a dream. When he tried to sit up, and to Izuku's misfortune, he found his leg in a cast. His eyes swollen, and a feeling of deep emptiness in his chest. A quite real memory came to his mind instantly. I'm sorry. You can't be a hero without a quirk. Tears overflowed again, and Izuku had to squeeze his shirt tightly around his chest to try to control himself. The door to his bedroom began to open, and Izuku quickly rubbed his eyes dry. He immediately recognized the kind girl who had saved him, carrying a tray of food, and instinctively looked down in shame. That's good. You're awake now, she said, placing the tray on the side table and smiling genuinely. That is until he noticed that Izuku kept his eyes down without saying anything. Please, she said, bowing in front of him to bow. Forgive me for using my quirk on you. It's my fault you injured your leg. Finally, Izuku raised his face to look at her, still bowing, and his mouth opened, while tears began to overflow little by little. Who was this girl? And how could she be so good to him? Hearing no response, Ochako looked up and saw that Izuku Midoriya, as her mother had told her his name was crying uncontrollably. Does anything hurt? She said, worriedly about to touch him. Izuku, his mother called behind the kind girl's back, who stepped aside so she could hug him. I was so worried because you wouldn't wake up, she said, crying as she checked every inch of his face and arms. Mother, she murmured softly for some context. This girl kindly brought you home after receiving Recovery Girl's attention. His mother wiped her nose with a tissue and smiled a little. We owe a lot to this young lady. Izuku made a new effort to get up as Ochako Uraraka raised both palms in front of them. No, actually, he said, blushing a little at the mother and son's nod. I was just apologizing to your son for using my quirk on him without his consent. I have known of cases where that has ended very wrong. The truth is, Ochako tried to say, but she ran out of words halfway through. For a moment, Izuku remembered what he heard him scream, before opening his eyes as he fell. And internally he reflected if he had mistaken him for someone else, and that was why he had saved him. A new spasm in his chest was present like a puncture, and he couldn't help but press his fist into his chest with his shirt. They both looked at him with concern, although his mother's gaze suddenly became somewhat more severe. When I went to school to report your disability, some kids in your class told me that a boy named 𝗵𝘃𝗀 has been bothering you for a long time. Izuku felt a great chill, knowing beforehand where he was going with this. His mother took him by both shoulders and faced him, trying to hold back her tears, but Izuku looked away. Why did not you tell me? The silence stretched infinitely as mother and son now looked at each other with teary eyes. It's not what you think, he said with barely a voice. I want you to tell me, he said, squeezing her shoulders lightly. Tell me if it was that 𝗵𝘃𝗀 or one of his friends that pushed you off the building. Izuku covered his mouth with both hands, shocked that his mother asked him so directly, although she had already seen it coming and shook her head strongly. With some discomfort, Ochako was distracted by the decoration of Izuku's room. By the way, he said, remembering something. A few moments before I saw you fall from the building, I saw All Might running down the street and he was coming from that direction. That's why I turned around. Lucky, right? His mother looked at him with a new kind of sternness. Izuku, does this have anything to do with All Might? Izuku continued to cover his mouth and tears once again overflowed from his eyes, somehow giving him away. His mother frowned. Don't tell me you wanted to ask him for an autograph and you tried to follow him when he jumped off the roof, his mother ventured a guess. Izuku continued covering his mouth without saying anything and lowered his head a little. His mom sighed before standing up. You've taken this fanaticism too far, Izuku. But it's over now, she scolded, taking all the dolls and posters in the room, putting them in a box and taking them with her. Izuku made no attempt to stop her, but she stopped in the doorway. I do this because I want you to realize that not only All Might exists in this life, and that I am the one who is here with you. Izuku, unable to hold himself up anymore, fell back onto the bed and covered his eyes with both forearms. That was true. He never stopped to think about how his mother would have felt if she had died in that fall. Alone again, 𝗧𝗪𝗄 and Izuku remained silent for a long time. As I was saying before, I'm sorry, 𝗧𝗪𝗄 said, but Izuku did not dare to remove his arms from her face. It seems that I screwed up again, Izuku denied fervently in the same position, not daring to look at her. Well, I think they have. It's been a lot of emotions for one day. I'll let you rest a little, but I'll come back tomorrow to see how you're doing. 𝗧𝗪𝗄 left the room and closed it behind her. She remained for a few seconds leaning on the other side of the door, and the image of a smiling boy came to her mind who was undoubtedly very similar to Izuku Midoriya. Wow, he said with a lost look. Inside the room, Izuku continued with his arms covering him, feeling that the tears continued without stopping. He tried to calm down, and looking at the ceiling he thought that despite everything that had happened, at least he had been able to talk to a girl for the first time. He was slowly drowning in disgusting mud, and although he struggled to get out of there, he continued to sink. There was only her hand left outside of him that she tried to hold on to something, but there was nothing. 𝗧𝗪𝗄 woke up suddenly in what was obviously a hospital room and turned around to see his mother with an expression he didn't like in the slightest. Was it pity for him? What a stupid face are you making? Stop it. His mother approached slowly and, completely changing her expression, slapped him. Touch me again and you'll lose your hand. I can't believe I spoiled you so much, and I'm not saying I'm happy that monster almost killed you, but maybe you deserved it a little bit. Hey, again another slap. I told you enough is enough. Is it true that you've been picking on a boy in your class? 𝗧𝗪𝗄 let out a small snort. So what? He's useless without a quirk. Seeing the third slap coming, 𝗧𝗪𝗄 caught his mother's hand in the air, not expecting that his mother would hit him on the nose quite hard using her other hand. 𝗧𝗪𝗄 growled in response. Ma'am, please, the doctor said behind her. Maybe 𝗧𝗪𝗄 isn't to blame for being like this. Do you think there could be a reason? 𝗧𝗪𝗄's mother asked, rubbing her wrist. Don't talk about me like I'm not here with a demon, the boy complained, still holding his nose. We did several laboratory tests to verify that there will be no trace of the mud monster in your son's body. And in turn we realized that his testosterone levels are excessively high, probably as a side effect of his quirk. In a woman like you, who does not produce this substance naturally, the same would not happen. But in someone of the male sex it can manifest itself as severe changes in mood with a tendency towards aggressiveness and violence. They should test this woman anyway. She's almost a tomboy as far as I'm concerned. 𝗧𝗪𝗄's mother threatened him with her fist from a distance, being hindered by the doctor's arm. I recommend that you inject this drug every day, he said, handing her some boxes and syringes, and maybe you'll see some improvements in a while. Thank you for helping me with this, All Might said, drinking a large cup of coffee, looking at his reflection for a moment with eyes sunken into the liquid inside. It's nothing, said the police chief, taking a last sip of his own cup of coffee. I must admit that I also felt interested in that boy 𝗧𝗪𝗄, after seeing the way he got rid of that monster with a single attack. But to tell the truth, what I found is very unflattering and I doubt you'll like it, he said, handing her a folder. On the first page he found a photo of the boy in question with general information such as age, weight, and qualities of his quirk, but upon turning to the next pages in the school records, All Might quickly realized what his friend was referring to. He seems to be doing well in school, but he has a problem with his explosive temper, maybe with some drugs and professional help. I wish it was just that. It seems like he's kind of abusive to a particular boy in his class. All Might turned the pages until he found the information that the police chief was referring to, and his eyes widened. The young man with green hair and freckles was unmistakable. He was the same one he had rescued from the mud monster and who had later asked him if he could be a hero without possessing a quirk. She truly regretted having been so rude to him, but it was very important that no one knew the truth about the 𝗧𝗵𝗲. I tried to look for him to find out his own version of the story, said the police chief, lighting a cigarette. You know, to find out if 𝗧𝗪𝗄 is really an abuser, or just a teenager who doesn't know how to measure his strength well, he said. He took a drag and offered a cigarette from the pack to All Might, who actually seemed more interested in him continuing with his story. But I couldn't find him. The boy he was bothering, Izuku Midoriya, is on sick leave after falling from a building. A few blocks from where 𝗵𝘃𝗁 was caught by the monster, he took another drag. Apparently 𝗵𝘃𝗁 had previously told Midoriya that he should commit suicide, since he doesn't have a quirk, and also ridiculed him for wanting to enter the hero race, and the 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐽𝐼 stood up to the police chief's surprise, and his face became quite angry, clenching his teeth. Upset with myself, and somewhat with young 𝗵𝘃𝗁 for saying something so terrible. Fortunately, things didn't get any worse. A young woman who was passing by, with the quirk of making things levitate, was able to intervene in time, but they ended up falling badly and young Midoriya fractured his foot. Do you happen to know where young Midoriya lives? No, but, he said, dangling his cigarette from the corner of his mouth and typing on his computer, I can find out in a few minutes. Grass asked, do you plan to visit him? Yes, definitely, All Might said with a determined air. I just hope it's not too late. Izuku's mother watched with great concern at her son with the huge cardboard box in her hands full of the hero All Might's things, including the curtains in his room. It was a relief to see his son back on his feet, thanks to the quick recovery effect of Recovery Girl. But he had a feeling that something very bad was happening to him. I'll go leave this on the corner. If I remember correctly, today is the day they pick up this type of thing, he said, making his way through the entrance until his mother crossed his path. You don't have to do this, Izuku, she told him, blowing her nose with a tissue and her eyes glassy. I just wanted to teach you a little lesson, but that doesn't mean you have to throw away your things. Izuku also looked at his mother with some concern, and leaving the box on the table, he gave her a hug. Maybe at another time she would have cried at a moment like this, but in the end she felt like her tears were over. She had also decided to appear stronger in front of her mother so that she would not worry so much about him. I was thinking about what you told me, and I really don't need all these things if I have you. Hero, and you're right, I took this fanaticism to the extreme and I almost lost my life. I shouldn't have given so much importance to a single person. Izuku tried to repress those intense feelings that had overtaken him. It's like the hero Hawk said in an interview. Sometimes out of the desire to save the world, we forget those closest to us, even our families. But I promise you that from now on, before doing anything, I will also think about your feelings. Izuku, his mother said, hugging him even tighter and looking up to look at him. She was surprised that her son was forcing a smile. So ultimately I will follow a different path than All Might. His mother finally let him go, a little more surprised, and Izuku took advantage of this to resume leaving the house with the box. I'll be back in a moment, he said by way of farewell. Already on the street, Izuku noticed that it was another day of blue sky and gentle breeze. Placing the box in his hand, he noticed that there was a nice trail of clouds where a plane had passed before. He followed the trail with his finger in a straight line until he came into view of the street again and saw a tall, very thin blonde man with deep-set eyes in front of him. Izuku was surprised by throwing the box to the ground and revealing its contents. The man gritted his teeth as he saw the young man bending down to pick up the All Might action figures, which had fallen out, and decided to help him. I'm sorry, said the boy as he received one of the figures from the stranger's hand. Are you going to throw this away? The man asked him, getting distracted by another of the figures and looking at it carefully in front of his face. Yes, Izuku acknowledged, although when he saw that the man delved deeper into the contents of the box, he smiled a little embarrassed. Unless you want them. They both looked directly into each other's eyes, and Izuku thought there was something sadder in that man's gaze, beyond his physical appearance. Maybe he had some illness that made him look like that, and seeing him with the figure of All Might in his hand, he couldn't help but think that he was the complete opposite image of the smiling hero. Do you no longer admire the hero All Might? Asked the stranger. I think All Might is the best hero in all of history. I have always been a big fan, and you know. He personally saved me from the attack of a horrible monster that tried to suffocate me, and for that I am eternally grateful to him. Izuku paused before continuing, and he lowered his gaze a little, but after saving myself I realized that in reality I will never be like him, no matter how hard I try. I think that after my father left, I started to think of All Might as a father figure, as a role model from whom I could follow in his footsteps. But without a quirk, I now realize that that is practically impossible, and I must admit that I felt very sad about it. Looking up again, Izuku realized that the blonde man was crying because of his story. Please don't feel bad for me, said the boy, extending a handkerchief to the stranger. There are many other things I can do with my life. All Might kindly recommended that I join the police, and I think he might be right. Although I haven't yet made a final decision. The man stood up and looked at him with new determination in his eyes. Then I will help you. In front of Izuku's eyes there was something heroic in those words, and the reflection of the morning light behind him made that man see stronger than he had seemed at first. A dismissal bell ended another day of classes at Izuku's school, and he headed to the exit with a displeased expression, trying to reflect on all the changes that had recently occurred in his life. The first significant change had been that the man he met on the street, a kind of retired personal trainer, and who he now knew was called Yagi Toshinori, had gone to talk to his mother to convince her to allow him to train him in the morning. and it seemed like a way to strengthen his body and mind, something he had said was necessary for any path he decided to take. At the same time, he had promised to introduce him to the city's police chief so that he would allow him to take a course, special, and to be able to check if he would like to work for the police, as she had told Mr. Toshinori. He still wasn't sure if that was the path he wanted to take, but it was worth giving it a chance. Here, a cheerful girl called him from a distance next to the door, making him blush a little under the insistent gaze of others, surely realizing, by the uniform, that she came from another institute to see him. That had been the second big change in his life. The kind girl, who he now knew, was called Ochako Uraraka. She had come to see him every day after school to walk together to the station. They always talked about interesting things like heroes or news, and ultimately he wanted to continue seeing her every day. But deep down, a part of him wondered the real reason why she had continued to visit him after she had recovered, and that sometimes made him feel something strange. A small snort from behind made Izuku's skin crawl. "Step aside, Deku," 𝐭𝐻𝐻 complained behind his back, noticing until now that he had stopped walking because he was thinking about his things. "I am sorry, 𝐭𝐻𝐻," he said, stepping aside to let him pass, noticing that the expression on his face had changed a little. Lately he seemed more serious than usual, and that in turn made him look intimidating, but in another way that he didn't know how to define well. Ultimately, that was the biggest change in Izuku's daily life. For some reason, 𝐭𝐻𝐻 had stopped picking on him, and he wondered if that had been because of the incident they had with the mud monster. Unlike him, 𝐭𝐻𝐻 had been able to fight the monster and win. In short, there was a big gap between the two of them. Maybe 𝐭𝐻𝐻 had already realized that there was no point in bothering someone who was ultimately not on his level. "Is that the boy who used to bother you?" Uraraka asked him next to him, but it seems like they get along much better now. "Why do you say that, Uraraka?" Izuku questioned, moving away a little, since he still wasn't completely used to being so close to him suddenly. "I heard he told you that you can do it. You know, Deku." Again Izuku got nervous. No, actually it refers to the other way of reading my name in kanji. Kind of useless. It was something he said when we were learning to read, but the truth is that he told me it for so long that he already lost the meaning. Sense of insult. Uraraka put her hands together with an almost radiant smile. "Well, you should give it whatever meaning you want from now on. As far as I'm concerned, Deku, which means you can, is a nice nickname." Ochako started jumping with her fist towards the sky, repeating Deku over and over again. "Why, you can call me Deku if you want," said Red as a tomato. "I'll do that," she said, still with a big smile, starting to walk towards the exit. However, suddenly a large crowd of students had gathered in front of the entrance and were not allowing them to leave. A blonde-haired boy appeared in front of Bakugo, followed by students who clearly belonged to other institutes. "So you are Katsuki Bakugo, the one everyone is talking about. They say that you are interested in entering UA this year, and I came to introduce myself, since I also plan to take the exam. My name is Nido Monoma, and it is a pleasure to meet you," he said, extending his hand to her with a somewhat exaggerated bow. "Move," the other replied, rejecting his hand with a slap. "Oh, of course. They had already told me, although I had to check it out myself. In addition to having played the role of victim for a long time, they say that you are the most arrogant of all since you defeated that third-rate monster. But know that in case that alone is not enough to enter a school as prestigious as the UA." The students on Bakugo's side stepped back, quite scared at what they had just heard this Monoma say, sure of what Bakugo's type of response would be now. Uraraka watched as Deku swallowed heavily without losing sight of what was about to happen. "I want you to leave and never come back. Do you understand?" To everyone's surprise, the strange guy began to laugh extravagantly. What did you say? I couldn't hear you if you spoke so softly." "What happened to the dye energy you said to that slime monster? Because it was something like that, right? Go dead." Monoma shouted with a huge explosion towards the sky that amazed everyone and left them speechless. Everyone except Midoriya, who started whispering to himself, but everyone could hear him. "I can't believe it. Does he have the same quirk as 𝐭𝐻𝐻? No, that would be very strange. If fire powers are already rare, explosives are even rarer. Maybe 1 person in 3 million has that quirk. But even if it was the same, that looked too similar to the type of explosions 𝐭𝐻𝐻 uses. So his quirk must be copying quirks." Monoma adjusted his hair with a hint of bewilderment at being caught in his trick so quickly, but recovering almost instantly into his arrogant attitude. "You see it. What you did actually wasn't that impressive. What I think is that you really like attention, and that's why you played the victim for so long, hoping to be safe. But how could you see real heroes like All Might were too busy to deal with your victim delusions?" This finally managed to bother Bakugo, who tried to grab him by the collar of his shirt. But Monoma was faster and dodged him to go to the other side. "And from what I see, you're a bit slow too. That will be bad for the new scheme in the UA entrance exam." "No," Bakugo growled, preparing to unleash a punch. "That's right," Monoma said, dodging the first and subsequent blows, and suddenly seemed to slip under Bakugo's outstretched arm. in his last blow. And as if everything were suddenly in slow motion, he stuck bunny stickers on 3 parts of the back, much to Bakugo's bewilderment. As far as I'm concerned, I won't have to worry about you during the exams, and it was all a big media hype. Monoma began to laugh extravagantly again. What a loser, Monoma mocked, pointing at him. You, Bakugo said, sparks coming from the palms of his hands. That's enough, said a beautiful red-haired girl with a long ponytail, hitting Monoma on the back of the head and holding him like a dog by the neck. So this strange excursion to go for crepes was about this. You should be ashamed. Then he gave everyone a bow in apology and farewell. Everyone watched as the students outside the campus left, leaving them with a feeling of disbelief on their faces, because everything had ended in such a pathetic way. Already on the train back home, Uraraka leaned a little towards Deku's cell phone so she could see the information they were looking for. For a moment in his position, Uraraka realized that this time Deku had not been nervous by his closeness. Maybe he was finally getting used to his presence, or maybe it was because he was truly focused on this. With a smile, I wish it was the latter, because seeing him turn red seemed something abnormal for a boy and therefore extremely adorable. Here it is, Deku announced. It says that the new director of the UA, Shouta Aizawa, decided, as the first change in his administration, to modify the entrance exam at the UA, which had been in place for more than 2 decades. And what happened to the previous little director? Ochako asked, imagining the smiling and friendly former director barking. Apparently he decided to leave teaching for a while to dedicate himself to his political career. He wants to be the next mayor of the city, OIC, said Ochako, imagining him with a little mayor's hat. Deku's face was still serious as he scrolled through the information on his cell phone. This is what Monoma must have been referring to, he said, handing Uraraka his cell phone with a silhouette of a human body and 3 types of red lights on the body. The first filter to enter the UA will be a competition in which the applicant he must avoid being marked on 3 sensors attached to his body and at the same time mark 3 other candidates to disqualify them. Thus, the new director contemplates giving fairness to applicants who have quirks other than those based on physical strength, such as type, psychic, or IQ. Previously, the exam consisted of fighting with robots and collecting points. Like in a video game, Uraraka pointed out, and Deku nodded. In a competition like this, Kachin would not have the slightest difficulty entering, but from what we could see today, agility has become something really fundamental. I think the ability to think quickly could also be decisive, he said, pointing at it. We're all impressed by your ability to analyze Monoma's quirk so quickly. Are you sure that's not your quirk? Have you ever taken IQ tests? Finally, Deku began to blush and make funny gestures with his hands, much to Uraraka's liking. My mother took me to take many tests, including intelligence tests, but it turned out that I was only slightly above average. But nothing that can be boasted of and much less that can be classified as an IQ quirk. It was still impressive. Uraraka smiled and Deku had to cover his entire face with his forearms to bear it. Oh, this is my stop, Uraraka said, getting up. See you tomorrow. Deku nodded without completely uncovering his face. Would he ever get to say a proper goodbye to her? Of that he was not sure. Hello, how have you been? Said the police chief, receiving All Might in his office, initially noticing his suit and tie set. Oh, if I remember now, starting today you started your training to teach at UA. Don't forget to send my congratulations to the new director, Eraserhead. Yes, All Might answered, taking a seat and beginning to smoke as he transformed with a tired air. Although I have begun to fear for this year's aspiring heroes, it seems that Aizawa will not think twice about disqualifying any prospect who does not seem suitable. I remember hearing him say that there is nothing more cruel than someone giving hope to someone without talent. All Might reflected on that. But discarding someone so quickly can also be very cruel. The comment seemed a little strange to the police chief, but he decided to get to the point. Yes, anyway. The reason I called you is because we need your help to investigate a case, he said, passing a folder to All Might. I waited for him to read the first page on his own before continuing. So Endeavor's son has disappeared. Actually, so far we have strong reasons to think that he fled, said the police chief, asking him to turn the page. I can't give you all the details, but Endeavor's family has been in decline since the death of his first son, Toya. And it seems that Endeavor was putting too much pressure on his son to be his successor. It is unlikely, but the last thing known is that he was preparing for the UA entrance exams, since the recommendation system was also annulled by the new director. I see. I'll be on the lookout. All Might answered, looking at the face of Endeavor's son in the file photo, noticing the burn scar on his face. He couldn't help but press his teeth with some anger. It was incredible regret that Endeavor would do that to her own son. In the darkness of the night, a flash of lightning illuminated Todoroki's face as he moved away scrap metal to make himself a shelter and protect himself from the approaching storm. Of course, he had never imagined himself in such a precarious situation. But he told himself that anything was better than continuing to live in the same house with his crazy father, already having a minimally adequate shelter to spend the night. He thought for a moment about making a fire to warm himself, but he gave up instantly, refusing to use that power, which he felt had never belonged to him, or rather, that he had never wanted to have. Letting himself be carried away by fatigue, he tried to settle down and immediately fell asleep, still rubbing his eyes from the dream of having to get up before dawn. The first thing Deku saw when he arrived at the beach where Mr. Toshinori had summoned him was the man doing pull-ups with a ball, quite skillfully if he had to admit it. "Football soccer," Izuku exclaimed, receiving the ball with his hands. "That's right, young Midoriya. Today we will play soccer. Not to brag, but I lived in Brazil for a while. But this is nothing like the exercises we had been doing until now exactly. Today we will work on reaction speed and agility." The memory of Monoma dodging all of Kachin's blows came to Izuku's mind, and he told himself that he would also like to learn to do something like that. "Okay," he said with a determined air. "I like it that way," he said, handing her some strange white gloves that seemed to have sensors on the fingertips and some soccer cleats and knee pads, joined together in one piece. "What is this?" "Just something I borrowed from the UA engineering area." "And how did he get it?" "That's a secret," he replied. Deku was already used to that kind of response and started putting it on, feeling a little strange at first, and sometimes he felt that Mr. Toshinori was making fun of him. But in the end, thanks to his help with morning training, he had begun to notice some changes in his physical complexion, and that made him feel more sure of himself. "The first thing you'll do is try to hit the target there using the ball," he said, pointing to a buoy in the sea quite far from the shore. "But that's impossible." Mr. Toshinori proceeded to take the ball out of his hands, and with a single forceful kick he hit the target on the buoy without problems. "It is not a problem of strength, but rather of focusing energy on a single point. As you will notice, today we have the tide in our favor, so the balls will be returning eventually." Deku noticed a net bag filled with many balls. "And what will happen to the beach cleaning project?" Deku asked, concentrating on the target of the buoy that continued to move with the flow of the water. "Let me worry about that," Mr. Toshinori replied. On his first kick, Deku was impressed when he noticed that the ball reached the distance of the buoy, although it failed to hit the target. Mr. Toshinori scratched his chin lightly, apparently also impressed. "Do these things help focus energy?" "Something like that." Deku looked at the gloves and shoes for a bit before continuing. They were starting to like that stuff. "I'll come at night to clean the beach," Deku proposed, placing a second ball to kick. "Then we'll see if you have the energy left to do that, young Midoriya. Remember that since today is Sunday, we will train until noon, and this will be the lightest thing we will do today." Deku's face looked slightly worried at that sentence. Without a doubt, Mr. Toshinori had proven to be a very severe coach. Deciding not to worry ahead of time, he proceeded to kick the ball again with all his might. This time the ball seemed to go straight to the target, until, "Wow," said the boy with big red wings, catching the ball in the air and beginning to do some pull-ups. "Sorry, but when I see a ball I can't resist. It's Hawks." Despite young Midoriya's amazement in All Might's mind, he began an internal dialogue, maintaining a serious countenance on the outside. Hawks was known within the business for working on some pretty dark issues involving high-ranking government officials and problematic heroes. Despite his young age, in the last year he had achieved success in solving cases almost comparable to Endeavor, and that is certainly impressive, but something in the way he worked did not generate much confidence. As if reading his thoughts, he suddenly saw the intentions of the winged hero. "Pass over," Hawks shouted, sending the ball back with incredible force straight to All Might, who only frowned. However, it was Midoriya who stood in front to catch the ball with both hands, creating great friction and sending it into the sky to reject it. "Phew," Midoriya sighed, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Sorry, Hawks apologized, landing on the shore in front of them. "I think I should improve my passing aim." "Are you okay, young Midoriya?" All Might worried, standing up. "Yes, these gloves and shoes are really amazing, Mr. Toshinori. Whoever created them is definitely a genius. Actually, I think she's a girl." Sorry, I didn't mean to assume that only men study engineering, but yes, I understand you. It's like the hero's profession, which at first had few women. That's what I thought." Hawks cleared his throat as he noticed he had been ignored. "I'm sorry to interrupt such a pleasant conversation, but I would like to ask them if they have seen something or someone strange around them." Deku stepped forward. "We always come here to train in the mornings, but so far we have not seen anyone suspicious around. If we see anything we will immediately report it to the police." "And what do you say to me, Mr. Toshinori?" Hawks asked very close to his face. All Might frowned again. "I have not seen anything really, because I think you look a little suspicious." "Mr. Toshinori is a good man," Midoriya tried to intercede, until the man stopped him. "Don't worry, young Midoriya. I'm already used to being played for my appearance. I myself would suspect me if I saw me on the street. So I think it's best to talk a little with the hero Hawks to dispel any trace of doubts." "Please don't take me for granted, Midoriya," Hawks said with a smile. It'll just be a little chat to dismiss any details this kind man might tell me, and you'll have Mr. Toshinori back. Okay, Izuku agreed, still a little worried. Keep doing this workout until you've done it 100 times and then move on to doing 100 pull-ups in a row without dropping the ball. 100 pull-ups. But it's my first time playing with a soccer ball. Mr. Toshinori walked over and lovingly placed his hand on Midoriya's head. I know you can do it. Izuku didn't know what caused it, but for a brief moment an almost mystical connection seemed to unite him and Mr. Toshinori. Something warm and bright. And the man seemed to notice it too, because he gave him a smile that Midoriya couldn't help but think was quite pleasant and tried to replicate it in response. I'm glad you're smiling again. Young Midoriya, All Might thought very happily. Come on, Mr. Toshinori, Hawks asked further ahead, turning his back on the scene, as if that seemed too cheesy to him. The sooner we leave, the sooner we'll be back. The man quickened his pace so he could catch up with Hawks, and Midoriya watched them walk away from the beach. Without realizing it, he touched his hair where it had been crushed and soon returned to his training. I'm not liking this, Bakugo said, stepping back from the injection that his mother had in her hand. I think that garbage is just doping me. It makes my explosions less powerful and makes me slower to react. Well, maybe if you train more you could solve it, the woman said, catching his arm and injecting it in one go. You see it. If an old woman like you could catch me so easily, I don't know what I could pass on the UA admission exam. His mother crushed his hair for a moment, which she knew irritated him a lot. I'll just tell you one more time. Train na, stop this and stop being so arrogant already. Bakugo growled in response and walked out of there. Don't you think you're being a little harsh on him? Her husband asked from the table. For a long time I spoiled him because I liked him to receive praise for his quirk. But that only made him a boastful fool. From now on he will have to try harder, and he will discover that if he doesn't he could become a burden to someone. Further, the woman looked out the window at a nearby tree as its branches shook. Let's get to the point, All Might asked without losing his serious face. If this is about the case of Endeavor's son. Oh, no, Hawks shook his finger. We are certainly concerned about the disappearance of young Todoroki, and we think that we will soon be able to locate him to return him to his loving father. But that is not the reason why I dared to interrupt your training with young Midoriya. Hawks handed a photograph to All Might and he practically opened his mouth in surprise. Tamura Shigaraki, the offspring of 𝐴ll-for-One, yes. He was last seen during the incident of a recently inaugurated bridge that collapsed. Upon analysis, there are no structural failures, which is why we believe that he was the one who damaged the bridge using his quirk. Hawks held out a second photo, and it was a mysterious man with a mask that covered his mouth and nose. We believe that his target was this man, new mafia boss, Overhaul, who was passing by the bridge with his car at that time in a front between criminals. That's what we'd like to know, Hawks acknowledged. If the reason for the attack were clear, it would be easier to try to predict his next move. And that's why I'm asking you. Hawks' face had become unusually serious. When you fought with 𝐴ll-for-One, for the last time, was there anything that told you that he was leaving any unfinished business for his successor? No, All Might answered flatly. When I definitively defeated 𝗷-for-One, Tamura Shigaraki had already completely broken ties with him. He probably realized that he was just being used and left him without looking back. We destroyed all the nomas that were there, being covered up, and we seized all the research of Dr. Kyudai-Garaki, who was also taken into custody. But I think you already know that. I was afraid you would say that. So we are the same as at the beginning, Hawks acknowledged, relaxing his face a little. And how are you getting on from that fight? If you can tell. All Might let out a big sigh. Now I can only work as a hero for 15 minutes a day, so it has become an act of coming and going. Even so, you once again surpassed me and Endeavor on the popularity charts this year. And although it's not like anyone pays attention to those details, don't you think the time has come for you to retire? All Might looked away at the window and Hawks followed him to an empty nest in a tree. Ah yes, I see. You are still in the process of finding a worthy successor to be the new symbol of peace, before you can retire. Hawks took a sip from his cup of coffee, trying to hide a smile. Could it be young Midoriya? All Might stood up with the intention of leaving, having caught a hint of mockery in what Hawks had just asked him. I think I have already answered all the questions that concern the case. Indeed, Hawks acknowledged without intending to stop him. But if you remember anything else, you can call me whenever you want. It would be a great honor, Hawks said, extending one of his cards, which All Might kept in his pocket. A moment after closing the door of the private room they had rented in the cafeteria, Hawks allowed himself to stretch his legs under the table, and looking up at the ceiling he remembered the boy with green hair and freckles that he had seen on the beach with All Might. So he could be the next symbol of peace. He laughed a little. What a curious choice. All Might was walking back to the beach, still annoyed by that interaction with Hawks, convinced that he would never end up liking that guy. Excuse me, a voice called behind him, and when he turned he saw a young girl with pink hair and strange eyes. Yeah, my name is Mei Hatsum, and it is a pleasure to meet you. Hello. Toshinori was surprised, although the name seemed somewhat familiar. The girl continued to watch him with a big smile. Of course, as All Might, this happened to him all the time, but in his current form people used to avoid him. Then a terrifying thought came to mind. Could she perhaps be one of those young women who took men to bars and then made them spend large sums of money? I'm sorry, I have to go back to the beach now. Someone is waiting for me. Toshinori tried to continue walking. I don't know, worry, the young man on the beach is fine. I've been watching him very closely since he left, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 assured, managing to capture the man's full attention. As for me, I'm an engineering major at the university. Oh really? Yes, under the new entry system. They said we had 3 months to submit a project that would be played according to its qualities. But I went ahead and submitted my project early. And what's wrong with being enthusiastic and want to attract the attention of investors from the beginning? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 began to laugh at All Might's shock and concern. Of course, I always make sure to put a satellite tracker on each and every one of my babies, he said, showing her a device with a kind of radar. Of course, just to make sure they don't end up in the wrong hands. At the same time, sometimes I place small microphones and cameras, All Might said, almost terrified. No cameras, because I don't need them, she said, pointing at eye level. As you can see, my quirk allows me to see things from very long distances, so I can monitor each of my babies myself. You drank. Right now I see that Midoriya is still trying to complete the 100 shots that I left him with before leaving. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 smiled with a somewhat dreamy air. I could use an assistant who is as docile as him and who helps me test my inventions. My current assistant is always scolding me about everything, like asking me if I followed all the safety standards or things like that. But young Midoriya is very busy. All Might tried to justify it. What a shame. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 quickly turned around. But you know what's funny? Earlier, on this same beach I saw the #1 hero, All Might, swimming. I wouldn't mind if he gave me his opinion about my babies. He thinks I should keep going. Here, do you think Midoriya has seen it? It would be a good idea to ask him, right? All Might let out a sigh of resignation at this girl's blackmail. Please forgive me, young Midoriya. All Might mused. It had already gotten a little dark, and Mr. Toshinori had told him by message that he had been delayed due to some inconveniences, but he was already on his way. Without realizing it, time had passed. Izuku was now trying to meet the goal of pull-ups, but so far he had only managed to do 20 in a row. I knew it was just a matter of building muscle memory, so I just had to continue maintaining a good pace. You can do it, he remembered, and following an impulse, he kicked the ball towards the scrap metal, trying to imitate Hawks. However, when he went for the ball, he was terrified to see a hand peek out from between 2 containers. She screamed and backed away, before determining that she'd better see if anyone was hurt. As he separated the containers, he saw a boy with a huge red scar over his left eye, barely conscious and breathing heavily. Hey, are you okay? She tried to move him by the shoulders. Don't worry, I'll call an ambulance right away. When he took out his cell phone, the boy slapped him to stop him from doing so. Don't call anyone and leave, but didn't you listen to me? Go. Spikes of ice emerged around him, and it was then that the boy lost consciousness. Deciding not to pay attention to what the boy had told him, he made space between the ice and with a determined air, he arranged it as best as possible so that he could carry it on his back. On a laptop, on a bed full of Cabbage Patch dolls, a video scene was repeated over and over again. It was the moment when Bakugo was suffocated by the mud monster. The monster smiled maliciously and his hostage was seen struggling, with tears overflowing from her eyes. Katsuki Bakugo, you are so cute. Himiko Toga smiled, quite blushing. Returning to the video once again, I want to know more about you. Knock twice, said, poking his head out the door, wearing only the mask of his costume. In a single movement, Toga closed the laptop and hugged the cushion she was lying on. Twice. You're supposed to knock and wait for the response before entering. The man closed the door and knocked. Himiko didn't answer and saw the shadow under the door move from side to side. That made her smile a little. Twice was still pacing back and forth when he saw Toga leave the room. I'm sorry. I heard you talking to yourself and I thought you might be going crazy, and I just thought you might want company. I'm not going crazy, Toga said, sitting on the couch in the dingy living room. I was just thinking out loud, and you know I don't like you spying on me. Yes, I already know. So please don't be mad at me, Twice asked with a tear peeking out of his mask. I'm not angry, but rather excited, Toga said, playing with her feet. I'm going to propose to the boy I like. That's great. We have to decide what you're going to wear. It's a very important thing, said Twice, throwing the clothes out of the drawers, although if I'm the lucky one you don't have to wear anything. His comment was received with a slap, worthy of a comic duo. You know I'm grateful for letting me stay at your house, but that's not why I'm going to take off my clothes, Toga said, stepping over the clothes lying on the floor towards the exit door. No, please don't leave. I swear I will change, Twice begged at his feet. I'm not leaving. I'm just going out to look for what I'll wear the day I propose, Toga smiled, blushing. You're right that it's something very important. When he opened his eyes, the first thing Todoroki saw was the worried face of the boy from before. Startled, he sat up in bed, dropping a damp cloth that had been on his forehead. He held his head, still feeling quite dizzy, and so he couldn't help but lie down again. Please don't get up. You still have some fever, Midoriya said, placing the wet cloth on his forehead again. We are in the hospital? Todoroki asked, looking around the room. No, at my house, Midoriya smiled. So I guess you're kind of a minimalist. Midoriya smiled a little embarrassed. A lot of things happened and I got rid of a lot of the decoration. I see, Todoroki said, closing his eyes. Does anyone else know I'm here? No, Midoriya said, standing up and walking towards the door. So for now, try to rest. Given the lack of response, Izuku left the room, but before closing he could hear him speak again. Don't let anyone know I'm here, Izuku responded with a small sound of agreement. Taking his cell phone out of his pocket, Izuku realized that he had several new messages from Mr. Toshinori. And to his surprise, at that very moment a call was coming in on silent mode. On impulse she diverted the call, instantly regretting it. Without allowing his nerves to rest, the keys were heard at the front door of the house and Izuku hurried to catch up with his mother. Izuku, she said smiling, closing the door behind her. It's good that you're here. After her, she seemed to remember something, and he lifted her shopping bag. Today we'll have rice and curry for dinner. That's great, Mom, he said, pretending to smile, but unable to hide his concern. What's going on? Nothing, he quickly said before making a decision. Just invite a friend over. Really? A friend? Her mother asked, looking everywhere with her eyes. Yeah, it's just that he didn't feel very well and he's resting in my room. Shouldn't we call his parents? They're not in the city and where they are they don't have coverage. Izuku was quick to lie. That seems very suspicious to me. Izuku, he laughed nervously. But I'm glad you brought a friend home. This is the first time. The nervous laughter again. Just don't ask him too many questions. He's a very discreet boy and we wouldn't want him to feel uncomfortable. His mother nodded, heading to the kitchen. I will do my best to make the best impression on your friend, said his mother, raising a fist in determination. Thanks, Mom, Izuku sighed with some relief, telling himself that this lying wasn't for him. Izuku's mother had been fascinated by the boy who was undoubtedly quite handsome. And judging by the expression on her face, she was not even remotely thinking that everything was a farce. And tell me, Todoroki, have you guys known each other long? She said, serving him what seemed to Izuku a rather generous serving of curry rice. We met recently. Todoroki refrained from saying seriously, although after the first spoonful he seemed more encouraged to continue eating. It's delicious, he said with a slight smile. Izuku's mother remained on cloud nine as she served her son his portion. Mom, I'd like to invite Todoroki to stay the night, Midoriya said with a determined air. Sure, you can stay as long as you want. Todoroki lowered the spoon and his expression turned slightly sad. I wouldn't want to be a bother, you are not, both mother and son said, and they both smiled. For a moment, the memory of his mother holding him and laughing came to Shoto's mind. But was it a real memory, or just a wish for how he would have liked things to be? Someone knocking on the front door brought him out of his reverie and he became alert. Young Midoriya, why don't you answer the phone when they call you? Toshinori claimed, entering the dining room. I completely forgot to return the call. I'm sorry, Izuku apologized, very embarrassed. It's just that a friend came to visit me at home and I completely forgot. All Might couldn't help but initially look surprised when he saw Todoroki sitting at the table, and it seemed to him that he noticed it too. Polo Midoriya looked at them both and wondered if Mr. Toshinori knew anything about Todoroki. Then what happened? Uraraka asked, sitting on the train home, with her cell phone on her cheek. Izuku used his hands free as he finished cleaning the classroom, since it was his turn to do so. Well, after dinner, Mr. Toshinori took me and Todoroki outside with the excuse of continuing with the beach cleaning project. It turns out that Todoroki ran away from home and his father had been looking for him. And how did Mr. Toshinori know that? Being friends with the police chief, you can find out about that kind of thing. And then Todoroki returned home. Mr. Toshinori promised to give Todoroki a few days to think about what he wants to do, and that includes requesting his emancipation if he wishes. In the meantime, he will stay at my house. Poor Todoroki. His father must have pushed him too hard, if he's considering doing it. Yes, Midoriya acknowledged with some sadness, leaning from behind on one of the desks, and thinking for the first time that having a father also sounded complicated. Could it be that his father had left because he didn't have a quirk? Or for some other reason? You still there? I called Uraraka, still on the line. Yes, he said, reacting and remembering something. By the way, I would like to introduce you to Mr. Toshinori. He told me that you could accompany us tomorrow to meet a girl aspiring to the engineering area at the UA. He invented some gloves and shoes that have helped me a lot for my training. Really? Sounds interesting. So it's a date. See Sita? Oh, it's my stop. Then I'll see you tomorrow, Uraraka said, suddenly hanging up. Appointment, Izuku repeated alone in the room. Izuku continued to play with his fingers as he walked down the stairs of the second floor of the school towards the exit. Appointment. No, Uraraka was definitely not referring to the romantic sense of the word. Furthermore, he had specified that Mr. Toshinori would accompany them, so it was more than clear that by date he meant that it was a fact that he would see them tomorrow. Although on the other hand this would be the first time they would see each other on a weekend. Izuku blushed slightly. Would it be a good idea to bring some extra money in case Uraraka wanted to go to a coffee shop after meeting the engineering hopeful? Should she ask her mother what to wear? Many ideas tormented his head. When suddenly he almost tripped on the last step towards the lockers and had to take a step back to avoid falling. 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗏. Izuku covered his mouth with both hands. Apparently a girl was confessing to someone in the lockers. I like you a lot. Bakugo Midoriya rested both hands on his mouth to stop himself from making the slightest noise. But his mind was screaming Kachin. What are you talking about? In front of Bakugo was a girl bowing and offering him a letter, with her arms stretched wide. I've been watching you and I think you're a very deep boy. I can see it in your eyes. Bakugo saw his reflection in the mirror of his locker and only saw him tired of having to deal with this nonsense. Listen, I'm not the right person for you. The girl made a noise that told him she had started to cry. You say that because you like someone else? The girl asked with a trembling voice. Seeing his pathetic expectant face, he imagined his mother giving him a 𝗧𝗵𝗲, knowing that that was the answer she was waiting for to justify her rejection. Yes, why not? He said carelessly. I understand. The girl's eyes became even more moist and she ran away crying. What the hell is going on with these extras? Bakugo complained, carrying his backpack. Kachin, that wasn't good. You made her cry. Both Bakugo and Izuku looked at each other in surprise for a moment, and the first to react was Bakugo. What the hell? Mind your own business. Didn't they teach you not to listen to other people's conversations? For some reason his words were greeted by a happy expression from Midoriya. Kachin, why are you smiling? Are you making fun? Deku shook his head. Since the incident with the mud monster, I had noticed that your attitude had changed a little and I came to think that you had become ill or suffered a subsequent trauma, Deku explained, lowering his voice considerably with the following sentence. Although I also came to think that you stopped picking on me because you had noticed that the gap between us had become wider, and that I am no longer at your level. Bakugo stared at him for a long moment with complete seriousness, and Deku feared that she was looking at him with pity. Damn, 2 statements in a row. What I was missing. All I want is to get home to take a shower, he said, slamming the door to his locker and walking towards the exit, totally annoyed. Deku was stunned with eyes like those of a fried fish at the idea of having proposed to Kachin. Ha 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 ha, Uraraka laughed out loud. And then what did you do? I didn't think it was that funny. Deku was a little embarrassed. I'm sorry. But it's true that there is some tension between you two that can easily be misinterpreted. Uraraka continued laughing. Behind them walked Mr. Toshinori, who watched the tender scene between the young people, thinking that they undoubtedly made a beautiful couple. Suddenly he noticed 3 details in particular. The young woman's hair, bulging cheeks, and eyes were very similar to those of young Midoriya's mother. Very obvious, he thought, and he had to grit his teeth and cover his mouth a little to avoid laughing. Are you too, Mr. Toshinori? Midoriya complained when he noticed it. No, it's just that I remembered a joke. This time the 3 of them laughed a little. And by the way, what kind of place are we going, sir? Uraraka asked, finally finishing laughing. It's a small mechanical workshop. Uraraka let out a sigh of relief. For a moment I thought I had the wrong outfit, since you two come in suits. Deku and Mr. Toshinori looked at each other. I usually dress like this a lot of the time, Mr. Toshinori answered without giving it any importance. Do you usually dress like that too, Deku? She asked, looking at him from head to toe in a formal red suit and black shirt that contrasted very well with his hair and green eyes. By the way, you look very handsome. Thank you, he said, turning red. The same shade as the suit. Why, you look great too. Uraraka looked at herself in her high-waisted jean shorts and white blouse and told herself that her outfit was nothing to write home about. But she smiled at Deku's kindness. It was so cute. As if Deku read her thoughts, he smiled at her in a very warm way, like she had never seen him before, and Uraraka had to blink twice to confirm that it was the same Deku, whom she knew until now mainly by his expressions of being about to cry, or embarrassed about something. However, that pretty smile was lost in the face of a sudden explosion that sent Deku flying straight to the ground. I've had enough of you, 𝗧𝗵𝗲. I'm quitting, said a boy with black hair and glasses, leaving the workshop, followed by a screen of smoke. When they cleared up a little, the first thing Mr. Toshinori and Uraraka saw was a pink-haired girl with her breasts at the height of Midoriya's nose, who was doing her best to look as far away from the breasts as possible and not move a bit. Millimeter. And why would I need such a whiny assistant if I already have the one I want? He said, looking down at Midoriya, who was still crushed under her breasts, faced with the bizarre vision of perversion of someone as innocent as Midoriya. Neither Uriaraka nor Mr. Toshinori knew what to say. Please forgive me, young Midoriya. This happened because of my carelessness, All Might internally apologized. Already inside the workshop, Izuku was still affected by what had happened. Uriaraka seemed to still be processing it, and Mr. Toshinori was clearing his throat. Well, as you can see, this is where the magic happens, said 𝗧𝗵𝗲, presenting the entire workshop at once, which was packed to the ceiling with devices and cables. But of course, I hope to have much more space for my babies when I study at UA. Sorry, did you say babies? You mean your pets or? Asked Uriaraka, who suddenly felt her personal space violated with 𝗧𝗵𝗲 behind her back. And what do we have here? Mr. Toshinori was kind enough to cover Midoriya's eyes and himself in time, before hearing some moans from Uriaraka. Stop it, you're tickling me, 𝗧𝗵𝗲, they both could hear, and they turned on their backs. Worthy of two gentlemen. Well, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 concluded, releasing Uriaraka, I have an idea of your measurements. And what is your quirk? I can levitate things that. It's very complicated to work with gravity. Step, he said, avoiding her without letting her finish. Let's move on to the next one. Seeing 𝗧𝗵𝗲's intentions, Uriaraka put her entire body between her and Deku, who was still on his back and defenseless. Wait, you're going to get it dirty, she said and murmured very quietly, in more ways than one. Well, and what's your new helper quirk? Mr. Toshinori nudged Deku a little. I don't have a quirk, Deku said, finally turning around and with a very serious face. Uriaraka noticed that and was about to say something but was interrupted. That, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 got excited. The jackpot. Of course, you're a blank sheet on which countless things can be written. It's a hassle to have to adapt my babies in their stage of development to a quirk and then have to modify it for another for their presentation. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 took Deku by the hand and began to pull him to the back of the workshop. Come with me, a blank sheet of paper, and I promise that I will make you shine more than anyone else. It's okay, but I don't know if I got used to the blank page thing, Deku pointed out as he walked away from the sight of Uriaraka and Mr. Toshinori. I could also call you a quirk virgin, if that's better for you, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 proposed. That's 1,000 times worse. I think I prefer a blank page. Or my name. Stop blabbing blank paper, you're looking like my old assistant. Pardon, I like it that way. Deku turned a little red as he helped him take off his suit jacket. Out of the corner of his eye, All Might could see the young Uriaraka somewhat worried about what was happening between the young Midoriya and 𝗧𝗵𝗲, and he couldn't help but smile a little. How enviable those feelings of youth. Oh, what a relief. Finally, fresh air. Uriaraka stretched her arms towards the sky, happy to finally have left 𝗧𝗵𝗲's workshop. Sorry if it didn't turn out as we thought, Mr. Toshinori apologized. I never thought this 𝗧𝗵𝗲 girl was so scary. Both Deku and Uriaraka politely denied. At the end of the day it was kind of fun, said Uriaraka, not very convinced. Yes, besides, she didn't care that I didn't have a quirk, Midoriya said, looking at both his hands and smiling a little. And maybe 𝗧𝗵𝗲 is right that I'm a blank slate for possibilities. I'm glad you think that, young Midoriya said, Mr. Toshinori gently touching his shoulder. You are the only one who should be able to choose your path, and don't let anyone limit your possibilities. Not even me. Do you understand? See, Uriaraka watched them tenderly. They really were like father and son. And what should we do now? He dared to ask her. I have to take care of some matters, but you should take the opportunity to take a walk. There is a square near here, commented Mr. Toshinori, pointing in the right direction. In short, a strawberry milkshake would be very good for me. What do you say, Deku? 𝗧𝗏𝗏 accepted Midoriya. Well, then we'll see you later in the evening to continue cleaning the beach. Mr. Toshinori said goodbye. Nice to meet you, young lady. I'll ask Todoroki if he wants to come with us, Midoriya announced, seeing the man waving his hand as she continued to walk away. That seemed strangely familiar to Deku. Come on, Uriaraka asked, pulling him by the hand, which of course made him very nervous, but he tried to control himself. They both visited stalls, clothing stores, saw the displays, and even entered a pet store, where by chance they met the heroine 𝗵𝗃, with whom they took the opportunity to take a selfie with the bunnies, and almost at the end Deku bought a ball of soccer, all the time talking about interesting things and enjoying each other's company, until they arrived at a nice cafeteria with a view of the main fountain of the square, where they decided to enter. So, like 𝗧𝗵𝗲, you also want to enter UA? Deku asked excitedly. Yes, Uriaraka acknowledged, trying to get rid of the discomfort she felt upon recognizing him by rubbing the back of her neck. But in the hero course. That is awesome. Yes, but I still don't know if I can. But what are you talking about? Your quirk would definitely be very useful for being a hero. Even your name could be 𝗬𝗏𝗏. Hey, I like that one, Uriaraka acknowledged with an amused gesture, although again his face became somewhat sad. But it has nothing to do with my quirk or my name. Deku waited patiently for Uriaraka to continue. Although tuition and fees are relatively affordable for anyone who wants to enter the UA. My family is not having a good time. This statement deeply impressed Deku, who had always thought that everything was going well in Uriaraka's life, given that she smiled all the time. My father has a small construction company, and until now everything had been going well. But recently one of his bridges fell down. Deku covered his mouth in shock. Although the police investigated and showed that there are no structural failures, the process took long enough for my father to lose most of his clients. And was anyone hurt? Since the bridge had just been inaugurated, I asked my father to take me to see it after school and work, and since it was already very late, only one car was passing by at that time. Fortunately, when everything passed, I was able to levitate the car and put it to safety. A clear image came to mind about what happened. Inside were a man with a funny face mask and his little daughter who seemed very scared. It's good that no one was hurt, Deku said, relieved. They were lucky you were there to save them like me. Once again Deku's cute smile was present, to which 𝗬𝗧𝗏 couldn't help but blush slightly, trying to fan herself with her hand to get out of that state. The point is that my greatest wish was to become a heroine, to one day lighten my parents' expenses. But now it would be hypocritical of me not to worry about being a burden to them until I can work professionally. This left Deku thinking deeply. He couldn't help but remember his mother's worried face the day she had tried to end his life. He must have been the biggest, most selfish fool of all, he thought, pressing his fists into his lap. But I didn't tell you so you would feel bad for me. 𝗬𝗧𝗏 tried to laugh, a little uncomfortable. No, I don't feel sorry for you. I promise. Deku was quick to clarify. It's just that I thought I should be more like you. The day we met I didn't think things through. I only thought about myself, and I didn't stop to consider the consequences and what my mom might feel. After 𝗬𝗧𝗏 smiled in response. Well, you know what 𝗏𝗧𝗏 says, sometimes because we want to save the world, we forget those who are closest. Oh, I said the same thing to my mom the other day. And Sirio, and you know, training on the beach with Mr. Toshinori, I had the opportunity to meet him. Really. 𝗬𝗧𝗏 was excited. Despite being only 24 years old, 𝗏𝗧𝗏 is hot on the heels of best jeanist and endeavor, he said to Deku's nod, also admired by his achievements. But it's true that he came in first place last year as the one with the most charming smile above all might. They both laughed a little at how ridiculous that sounded. And in an interval 𝗬𝗧𝗏 again stopped to look at Deku's cute smile. But it's not that I like 𝗏𝗧𝗏 or anything, 𝗬𝗧𝗏 tried to clarify, moving her arms in front of her to cover herself a little. You turned red, 𝗬𝗧𝗏. They both laughed again. Having left the cafeteria, they were now walking in front of the fountain in the square. 𝗬𝗧𝗏, do you think you can wait here just a moment? I remembered I wanted to buy something. Yes, of course, 𝗬𝗧𝗏 agreed, a little surprised that he didn't ask her to accompany him, although she told herself that maybe it was a boy thing that she shouldn't know. He watched Deku walk away with his ball bag and took the opportunity to sit on the fountain. When she took out his cell phone, the first thing she looked for was the photo they had taken with 𝗵𝗃. But strangely she found herself humming at the part where the two of them appeared together. All in all, it was a good photo, he thought without realizing that his eyes were shining. Hey old man, why are you so upset? Kirishima asked, following Bakugo out of the video game area. Many would kill for your luck, you know that. Damn, that one could play calmly without being declared to one. I'm already tired of declarations. Oi, without expecting it, Kirishima bumped into Bakugo, who had stopped suddenly and saw him looking at a boy in a red suit running in the direction of the shops. I already know what will put me in a good mood. Beating a nerd to a pulp always revives me, he said, walking with determination. Hey, don't take it out on someone innocent. Kirishima chased after him again, worried about what might happen. 𝗬𝗧𝗏 was looking at her reflection in the water of the fountain when suddenly a shadow behind her approached. Expecting it to be Deku, she turned around, but instead discovered a young man in a black sweatshirt and red shoes. Under the hat he saw a pale face with scars. And when he tried to stand up, he dropped his cell phone with the photo he had been looking at. Where has he been? Bakugo asked himself, making fists with both hands. Hey, didn't you get your shot today, or what's wrong? Kirishima asked him, pulling him by the arm. Huh, as if that trash can handle me, Bakugo mocked, releasing his friend's grip. I must admit that the first few days it caused me some problems, but I'm back. You're telling me that you were given a substance specifically created to decrease your testosterone, and yet your body again produced an excess? Kirishima was impressed. You know, that's the most masculine thing I'll ever hear. Bakugo let out a satisfied huff when he suddenly saw Deku running in the opposite direction of the corridor they were in. There you are, he said, leaving after him. Wait, Kirishima shouted, following him. You're going to make me chase you like this all day? Midoriya stopped almost when he reached the fountain of the shopping center, and had to take a few seconds to analyze what was happening a few meters ahead. 𝗬𝗧𝗏 was still sitting at the fountain where he had asked her to wait for him, but next to her was a man who covered half of his face with the hood of his black sweatshirt. He seemed to be saying something to 𝗬𝗧𝗏 as she handed him her cell phone, which had apparently fallen. Deku, 𝐭 suddenly shouted, pulling him by the collar of his shirt. And although that took him by surprise, Izuku tried not to take his eyes off what was continuing to happen at the fountain. Stop it, he's not to blame for your excessive masculinity, Kirishima asked. Will you shut up? He shouted very close to 𝐎𝐻𝐸's ear, but Izuku didn't turn around. The suspicious man had begun scratching his neck insistently, and his attitude seemed increasingly strange to her. Yesterday you said that you thought I had stopped hitting you because you believed that the gap between the two of us had become wider and that you are no longer at my level. But today you are in luck, he said, pulling him up, taking advantage of their difference in heights. I will let you prove yourself. You and me here, without quirks. Not a good time, 𝐎𝐻𝐸. Deku answered, gritting his teeth, wanting to go as soon as possible to 𝗧𝗧, who seemed to be starting to look quite uncomfortable with that man. You see, you're just a big coward, 𝗧𝗪𝐻 said, raising his fist preparing to hit him. The limit of Deku's patience came when the strange man put his hand on 𝗧𝗧's shoulder and placed 4 fingers on her neck. Deku gritted his teeth very hard, and when he let go of his shopping bag, the soccer ball rolled away. I won't let you use me as your punching bag, 𝐎𝐻𝐸. Ever again, he said with a flying kick straight to 𝗧𝗪's side, managing to free himself and knocking him to the ground, trying to get back on his feet as quickly as possible. The first thing Deku saw was the soccer ball. Hey you, get your dirty hands off of him. Shigaraki had only a second to see that a ball was approaching with great force towards his face and removing his hand from the young woman's neck. He put his 5 fingers in front. 𝗧𝗧 watched in utter terror as the ball disintegrated, as if it had been made of dust all along. And he was even more terrified by the fact that a moment before those fingers had been on his neck. What neither of them expected was for Deku to run behind the ball and grab 𝗧𝗧 by the waist to remove her from the stranger's reach. A distraction, Shigaraki realized, standing up and hiding his hands in his pants pockets. What the hell was that? Kirishima asked from a distance. Police. On the ground. Bakugo was still holding his side. Kirishima's small distraction was enough for the stranger to back away and start to get lost in the crowd of the mall. Midoriya and 𝗧𝗧 left the police headquarters when it was already dark. Bakugo and Kirishima followed them, and upon meeting them the blonde looked angrily at Deku. 𝐎𝐻𝐸, sorry about earlier. It's just that I don't apologize. Why, I'll pay you back for 1,000. Is that clear? We'll see. Deku accepted the challenge. Stop smiling. You make me sick. I'm sorry. I know you've been asked this many times. But are you okay? Kirishima asked 𝗧𝗧 walking past him. She nodded. Yes, if it weren't for Deku, maybe I wouldn't be here anymore. It's true, that shot was amazing. I can tell you've been practicing. One day we should all get together to play together. Kirishima proposed, to which Deku responded with a nod and a smile. The kick you gave Bakugo was really good too, he said, placing his hand on the blonde's shoulder, who immediately shook him off. I met this ruffian in an induction course to be heroes. Best Jeanist himself asked me to put him on the right path, and that's what I tried to do. You talk too much, Bakugo growled, starting to walk in the direction of the station. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry that your date was ruined like that in the end. But hey, see you later. Kirishima said goodbye, going after Bakugo. Both Deku and 𝗧𝗧 looked at the ground somewhat embarrassed. It's true, Deku encouraged, taking out a box from the bag he was carrying in his hand. With everything that happened, I almost forgot to give you this. I hope you like it. Oh, and why? Oh, I feel bad. I didn't buy you anything, 𝗧𝗧 said, somewhat embarrassed, rushing to take the gift, and Deku shook his head. I wanted to thank you properly for saving me the day we met. For a while I didn't have the strength to do things right, but I want to change from now on, he said with a bow. Thank you very much, 𝗧𝗧. She smiled happily and raised her little fist in front of him. Today you saved me, so there is nothing to be grateful for. But we must promise that we will continue to take care of each other. Deku smiled, slightly blushing, and answered 𝗧𝗧's fist just as their parents left the police department, who looked at them tenderly. What do you say, young Midoriya? You met Tamura Shigaraki. Mr. Toshinori was startled in the darkness of the beach. Deku stopped pulling the huge piece of scrap metal for a moment and wiped the sweat with his forearm. Have you heard of him? Before he could respond, Todoroki crossed between them carrying a huge box. He was a close collaborator of All for One. I heard Dad talk about him on several occasions, and apparently he has a fearsome power. Yes, Midoriya stated, remembering how he had disintegrated the ball in front of them. It's a terrible quirk. It makes me think that it is better to have been born without any singularity than to have to be careful of touching things and destroying them. Without realizing it, Todoroki looked at one of his hands. And what did he want to achieve by attacking the young woman? Mr. Toshinori asked. Midoriya continued pulling the scrap metal with the ropes while continuing the conversation. Perhaps as a way to get rid of the stress caused by remembering the fact that 𝗧𝗧 had been in danger because of her. Shigaraki confessed to her that he was the culprit of having destroyed the bridge that his father's company had built, and that he was upset that 𝗧𝗧 had gotten in his way, saving that car, and he told you what he intended to attack the car. He didn't tell her, but he did tell her something very strange. Before Izuku remembered when she saw him handing his cell phone to 𝗧𝗧, he probably thought that 𝗧𝗧 would not survive their encounter, and that's why she told him that a long time ago. He also had people he really cared about, and remembering that caused him great discomfort. Mr. Toshinori remained meditating with a frown for a long time. Was he referring to his family? As far as his research had led, he had discovered that he was the grandson of his teacher, but until now Shigaraki had never shown interest in thinking back to his origins. Or could it be that now that he didn't have the influence of All for One, something had changed? "I'm sorry to interrupt your thoughts," Todoroki apologized in front of him, "but I would like to know how it went with my father. In short, he's not happy at all," he said, showing his burnt tie and throwing it away with the scrap metal. "Especially when I told him I wouldn't tell him where you were. But in the end he was able to understand that he hasn't been doing things right." Then he took out an envelope and he extended it to Todoroki. "He asked me to deliver this to you." Todoroki averted his gaze. "I don't want to hear your excuses. This is from your mother." Himiko Toga was skipping down the dark street when, passing by an appliance store, she saw something on one of the lit screens that caught her attention. She pressed her face to the sideboard, breaking into a big smile. "Ochako." On the news, Ochako had a shocked face, and next to her was a boy dressed in red who seemed to be telling something to the press. At one point they both turned to look at each other and smiled. "That?" Toga seemed to get more excited. "But that boy looks a lot like my first high school love. It's not like I care now, I have a new one. But in the end it seems like we have similar tastes." Himiko turned her back on the TV and clapped her hands together excitedly. "Maybe now you can understand how I felt back then, Ochako. Wow, that's a pink shirt." Uraraka got excited, taking out the gift that Deku had given her from the box. Without waiting another minute, she tried it on in front of the mirror, also checking the back, and felt an aura of happiness invade her. "She's very cute, just like Deku." When she realized what she had said without thinking, and even though she was alone in her room, she began to feel ashamed for having said it out loud. He hung the new shirt carefully, quickly turned off the light and lay down, covering his face with the sheets. "I better go to sleep. It's been a long day and I'm not thinking clearly anymore," she tried to convince herself. Deku sneezed, lying on the extra futon in his room. "Did you catch a cold?" Todoroki asked from the bed, and Deku shook his head. "Excuse me, if you don't mind me asking, have you thought about what you will do about your father?" she dared to ask Midoriya. "I haven't made a final decision yet," Todoroki began, and looked at the dark ceiling of the room. "The root of everything is that my father wanted at all costs to create a successor who could surpass All Might. That's why he married All Might. My mother, hoping that the combination of quirks would make the user extremely powerful." "2 quirks," Midoriya repeated, musing on how cool that sounded. Todoroki's face contorted with some suppressed anger. "No matter how you look at it, it is immoral to have taken advantage of his status to enter into an arranged marriage for those purposes. That is why I do not want to become my father's puppet using his quirk," Todoroki stated. "And what does your mother think about this?" "My mother was admitted to a mental hospital when I was still little." Todoroki touched the scar on his face. "My mother did this to me, throwing boiling water at me for having a look that was too similar to my father's." Midoriya looked at him quite shocked. "My mother's mental state has deteriorated since the death of my older brother, Toya, who was cremated with the fire he himself created, trying to gain my father's recognition." Deku tried to think of what he could say, but it was too much information. He was overwhelming. In the absence of a reply from Midoriya, who seemed to have been left speechless by his family history, Todoroki sighed and decided to continue. "That's why if I could get rid of my father's firepower, I would do it without thinking. That's what All for One did." Deku finally spoke very seriously. "He promised people who wanted to get rid of their quirks that he would free them from them. And in turn he promised those who were born without quirks like me that he would equip them of a singularity. That is why it gained so many followers in a short time. However, he began to hoard the best quirks for himself and became extremely powerful." Todoroki continued, frowning. "In that aspect, because of his ambition for power, he reminds me of my father. Mr. Toshinori told me that Tamura Shigaraki, the person who attacked Uraraka today, had a relationship similar to that of a father and son with All for One. But that when he realized that he wanted to use him, Shigaraki abandoned him." Then looking at it like this, "I think I'm lucky that my father only left when he found out I didn't have a quirk." That was the first time that Izuku made that statement, which although she had no evidence, she assumed was most likely. "Well, at least you get along with your mother," Todoroki pointed out in the letter my mother sent me. "She says she wants me to go visit her and I'm considering going tomorrow." "Then do your best. You will see that everything will be fine," Midoriya encouraged him. Todoroki nodded with a slight smile. It was a new day. The cherry blossom trees had begun to bloom, and Uraraka was waiting patiently under one of them after school. He covered himself with one hand from a ray of sunlight that came from between the branches. Uraraka. He was glad to see Deku coming up in a short run down the hill. Then holding himself up on his knees to recover. "I'm sorry for making you wait. Kachin tried to fight me again, but I managed to evade him." Uraraka denied the delay, and watched carefully as Deku caught his breath with his cheeks flushed from running. It seemed to Uriaraka that the sun was getting stronger and Deku seemed to notice her discomfort. "We should buy some ice cream at the stand over there," Deku pointed out. It was curious, but a moment ago I would have sworn that there was no stall in that place. Deku went a little ahead to buy them and seemed to talk to someone inside the stand. But to their surprise, Deku returned without the ice creams. "They say the ice cream machine broke down," Deku announced disappointedly. "That usually happens often. I even think it has become an internet joke." He tried to encourage him. "Oh, I know." Deku seemed to remember. "I know it would be better than ice cream in this heat," she said with a nice smile. Uriaraka was shocked to see that Deku took one of her hands and, radically changing his expression for a more concentrated and perhaps provocative one, he brought his wrist closer to his mouth. "You, Uriaraka," he said, kissing the inside of her wrist and then passing his tongue. Trembling and with a great start, Uriaraka turned around in bed. He breathed heavily with his face completely red, covering his cheeks. What kind of dream had that been? It was 4 in the morning and All Might couldn't sleep anymore. This whole Shigaraki thing was bothering him. Mainly because he kept thinking that All for One, although dead, had something to do with it. That time, 4 years ago, it had been a small operation to guarantee secrecy, and therefore very little had managed to leak to the media. They had been with him, Endeavor, Best Jeanist, Eraserhead, and of course the Rookie of the Year Hawks, who, due to his young age, had managed to pass himself off as a prospective All for One follower, and in his role as double agent had discovered their base of operations. Upon arriving and analyzing the records, they discovered that those monsters in the preliminary stage had once been people. Even now it caused him unimaginable fury to think that All for One had used his own followers to try to start a revolution in which he would benefit the most. He had taken advantage of people's deepest longings, and that could not be forgiven. Therefore, when the time came, he could not help but use his power 100%, resulting in the death of All for One, and he had been seriously injured during the battle. A news notification on his cell phone brought him out of his memories, followed by a text message, which despite the hour made him finish getting up. "Are you sure you don't want us to come with you?" Midoriya asked in front of the entrance to his house building. Todoroki shook his head gently. "I think it's something I should do on my own." "Okay, write me if you need anything. My mom and I will go for a little run since Mr. Tashinori had a matter to attend to. But I will have my cell phone on at all times." Midoriya's mom was already doing warm-up exercises from behind. "I never thanked you for what you've done for me, Midoriya," Todoroki said seriously. "But since I don't want to seem as cold as my father, I'll tell you that. I feel like you're the first friend I've ever had." Midoriya's mother had teary eyes holding back tears. Todoroki scratched his chin a little. "I have to go. We'll see you after school." Midoriya said goodbye with a smile. Uriaraka patted her cheeks to try to wake up. After all, she had not been able to sleep again, and she was still affected by that dream she had. She just hoped the train wouldn't take too long and she could get some sleep at school before class. "Uriaraka." Deku came running towards her down the platform. "Ah, Deku." Uriaraka was surprised. "I didn't know what this train line took," she said, pinching her cheek to make sure it wasn't another dream. "Normally not, but I went out for a run with my mom and it was a little early, so I decided to change my path and train a little in the school gym before class." At that moment the train arrived and they were unexpectedly pushed together inside to the other window of the car. "It seems like it's rush hour for office workers," Uriaraka mentioned, trying to lessen the discomfort of being so close. "Why, yes," he confirmed, trying to turn his head away from her, but thinking, "I can smell your shampoo and it smells great." "Ah, you saw. They say he will be the new symbol of peace when All Might retires." The voice of 2 young women sitting up ahead, chatting, caught both of their attention. "His name is Mirio Tagata and he is in the 2nd year of the hero race at UA, said one of them, showing a photo to the other. "He's very handsome. Maybe if I were 15 years younger you sounded like such a pervert." Both women laughed. Looking at Deku, Uriaraka couldn't help but notice his lost look. He had already noticed that sometimes when they mentioned All Might that happened. And that's why he decided to call him by touching his arm, but hard. I whisper as I squeeze the muscle in his arm. "Oh, I'm down here," she said, totally embarrassed, making her way through the people. "But this is not your station." Deku worried. Having left, Uriaraka fanned her face with her hand. As the train continued on its way, he internally wondered what was happening to him. Upon reaching the corridor of his mother's room in the clinic, Todoroki was not too surprised to see his father, dressed in civilian clothes, waiting next to the still closed door. He reflexively frowned. "I didn't come to see you," he announced when he reached the door. "I know, but I want us to talk, Shoto," he said, stopping his hand from turning the doorknob. "About what?" "How to continue with your training plan so that it accomplishes what you couldn't." His father handed him a document and he decided to review it. To his surprise, he had a photo of a condo and deeds. "If you want to go live with your mother, I won't object. There you can live away from me if you wish." The man looked away. "Your brother will go to university soon and your sister is about to get married. I wouldn't want to force you." To live alone with me. Shoto looked at the writings again and felt shocked. Although unable to completely forget his anger, he looked with renewed fury at his father. This doesn't even begin to remedy half of what you've done, she said, making a fist out of the paper. And I certainly haven't heard you apologize. Shoto, not to me, to my mother. To their surprise, the door to the room opened and a nurse wearing a mask was carrying Mrs. Todoroki in a wheelchair, apparently unconscious. Will you please have more consideration for the patients? The nurse complained. Mother, he tried to call her Todoroki by leaning next to her chair. She's just sedated, said the nurse. A few moments before they arrived, she felt overwhelmed that her son was coming to see her, and that's why we had to do it. Now I think it was for the best. The nurse passed between them carrying the chair, and Todoroki got the impression that he looked particularly at his father. I don't know, worry. Maybe when you manage to resolve your issues, you can visit her again, he said, probably smiling under the mask and continuing on his way. Suddenly Todoroki felt like everything was going in slow motion. His mother was walking away little by little, but she could still see his white hair, and she could hear the footsteps of the nurse who was about to turn down the hallway. Something wasn't right, but he didn't know what. Wait, she screamed, running to reach the nurse with her mother, but when she turned into the hallway, they were gone. Izuku was happy to see his cell phone. The message that Uraraka had just sent him said that he had forgotten that he was going to see a friend, and that was why he had gotten off the train early. For a moment she had thought that she still smelled of sweat from her morning jog and had wanted to avoid it. He continued walking towards the school. A new news notification appeared and he decided to open it. However, upon reading the headline, she couldn't help but change the expression on his face. 𝗵𝗃𝗀, the future symbol of peace, that was the article the women on the train were talking about earlier. Izuku continued reading as he walked. In short, the agency where Tigata boarded him spoke of the countless achievements the UA student had achieved, even surpassing heroes who were already professionals. His quirk was to traverse, which he used in combination with very well-worked physical strength, and his goal was to rescue 1,000,000 people. Seeing a photo of him, Izuku couldn't help but agree that in many ways he reminded him of All Might. Arriving at the entrance of the school, Izuku continued walking with his gaze lost, until he heard the sound of something colliding against the bars of the fields. When he got there, he was surprised to see 𝐭 practically destroying a ball with a kick. He looked upset in a way that Izuku recognized all too well. Why was he feeling the same way? Upon noticing Deku's presence watching him, 𝐭 looked away for a moment. What the hell are you looking at, idiot? Without thinking, Midoriya lowered his backpack to reach him on the court. No one invited you, so disappear. Turning a deaf ear, Deku kicked the ball as hard as he could towards the bars, and he actually felt a little better. What was he deaf? Did you read the article too, 𝐭? Bakugo received the returning ball due to the rebound effect and kicked it again quite hard. That moron's face doesn't even match All Might. To Bakugo's surprise, the dumb Deku didn't try to defend him and instead went to kick the ball again. Do you really think All Might will choose him as his successor? If he does, I will kill him, he shouted, kicking the ball even harder. Deku smiled slightly. I was surprised that you would agree to see me. Well, you weren't very subtle in your intentions, All Might replied, showing the headline on his cell phone screen with a frown, to which Mirai Sasaki, also known as Night Eye, only referred to adjusting his glasses. You didn't leave me much choice. You've been ignoring my requests to introduce you to 𝗵𝗃𝗀. I will meet him when I teach classes at the UA next semester. There is no need to rush, I think so. Whereas Mirio developed his quirk that arose as a defect and turned it into his power. His physical strength is totally natural, based on hard work, and it cannot be denied that he has a natural charisma that inspires just by seeing it. It could certainly become a great symbol of peace, All Might reflected. I knew what. But perhaps he has already achieved too much by himself, All Might interrupted at the dismay of his old companion. It is undeniable that young Tigata has formed himself and is more than admirable. He extended his hand in front of him. But my power, the one for all, is a power that must be cultivated and then passed like a torch. With young Tigata, I feel that with my power, more than passing a torch, it would be like fanning a fire that is already there. If you want to see it like that. Mirai Sasaki didn't say anything, and it was indecipherable what he was thinking behind those glasses. I'm not saying I've already ruled him out, but my first impression is that he doesn't need to be my successor, since he's already a hero in his own right. This time Sasaki's glasses flashed. That was very well rehearsed, All Might, but you're not fooling me. All Might frowned. The only reason you would reject the most logical and sensible option to pass one for all is because you are waiting for something or someone specific. So will you tell me what or who it is? Without planning it, the memory of Hawks asking him almost the same thing came to his mind. Yes, I'm waiting for something, confessed All Might. I've always thought that when I meet the one who should be the successor of One for All, I'll be the first to know, she said, standing up. Like the feeling of running when someone is in danger, and you feel that your feet move without thinking. To All Might's surprise, his old partner smiled. I've always appreciated your sense of humor. I told it very seriously, totally stupid and sentimental. What you're telling me is very worthy of you. But well, in the end it's your decision. Just promise me that you'll watch Midoriya when you have the chance. All Might nodded. Okay, I'll consider it. As he left school, Izuku saw another message from Uraraka telling him that she would start taking martial arts classes after school. It was a free course aimed at women, to teach them principles of self-defense, and that's why they couldn't walk together to the station from now on. At first that discouraged her a little, since she would no longer be able to see herself every day, although upon thinking about it she knew that it was very good that she could defend herself if necessary. On the other hand, he didn't really feel like talking that day either, he told himself, holding the sleeves of his backpack tightly. He was now ready to admit that he was upset by that article stating that 𝗬𝗏 would be All Might's successor, although the number one hero's opinion was nowhere mentioned. The mere assumption made him feel jealous because of his position. I didn't want to think what it would be like when I had a girlfriend, if that ever happened. Suddenly he remembered what he had to do to get out all that frustration he was feeling, and he started running towards the beach. Upon arriving at the place where she would debut martial arts, Uraraka couldn't help but feel a little nervous, although when she saw that one of the girls who were already sitting waiting for the lesson greeted her by waving her hand, she told herself that everything would be fine with a smile. Hello, he greeted her, sitting next to her. I'm Ochako Uraraka. Hello, you can call me Kami. It seems like you're new to this, but don't feel nervous. Thank you, I'll try. Have you taken classes before? A few. What happens is that the streets are no longer safe, tell it to me. Recently a stranger grabbed my neck and tried to use his quirk on me. How horrible, the girl said, although it seemed to Uraraka that she didn't really look scared. Looking at her closely, she was a blonde girl with light skin and a pretty figure, so Ochako thought that she surely suffered from constant harassment for being pretty. And that is why being attacked no longer seemed too strange to her. Another girl with long green hair was watching them both with her big round eyes on the other side, and Uraraka had no trouble imagining that her quirk would be related to frogs. So she smiled a little, but she only looked down at her. Maybe she was a little shy like Deku to Midoriya's surprise. Todoroki was already on the beach moving the scrap when he got there. He was a second away from calling him, when he noticed that his expression detonated quite a bit of fury and frustration. Surely something had not gone well during the visit to his mother. Now he felt a little guilty for having assured her that everything would be fine yesterday. Why was nothing turning out as planned? He said to himself, clenching his fists and ready to start working. Todoroki didn't seem to notice their presence, as he began to move the heavier scrap metal and they both continued working without stopping. All Might walked towards the beach and true to his word, he reviewed the articles related to the young 𝗬𝗏, becoming more and more impressed. Could it be that he was wrong to wait for the successor of One for All to reveal itself to him? Was Mirai right that she was being too sentimental about it? His coughing up blood had become more frequent and perhaps time was running out. He had to take responsibility for his power and pass the torch before it was too late, just as his teacher had told him a long time ago. Touching his side, he remembered how his respiratory system had been damaged. And looking up at the beach, he coincidentally gasped when he saw that all the junk had disappeared. He dropped his cell phone and watched, above two gigantic batteries, young Midoriya and young Todoroki screaming at the sky at the top of their lungs, overflowing with tears. Impossible work that would normally take 3 months had been accomplished in 1. Kami sniffed a little with her nose in the wind and gave a small smile. And tell me, Ochako, do you have a boyfriend? Her new friend asked suddenly. No, I don't think I'm ready for that yet, Uraraka admitted. But there is someone you like, right? Unwillingly, Uraraka remembered a little of her dream with Deku and blushed like a tomato. Oh, okay. To Uraraka's relief, her friend continued talking. I do like someone. You're very nice and pretty, so I'm sure he'll reciprocate. You think? She said, suddenly taking his hands, to which Uraraka nodded. And you think you could lend me something to wear when I propose? A little surprised by the question, Uraraka nodded. Yes, but I don't know if we're the same size. I think you're much curvier than me, she admitted, somewhat embarrassed. That doesn't matter, Kami replied, smiling and continuing with the walk, just as a lucky charm. Without really understanding what she meant, he followed her towards the entrance of the train station. Deku woke up hearing the sound of the waves at his feet. Abruptly he sat up, sitting on the sand, and next to him he saw Todoroki and Mr. Toshinori in the darkness of the night, apparently waiting for him to wake up. You did a great job, young Midoriya. You have far exceeded my expectations, Mr. Toshinori congratulated him. Izuku lowered his head with a slight smile. The last thing she remembered was screaming over a pile of scrap metal. After that, she had surely lost consciousness due to excessive fatigue. Thank you, but I wouldn't have done it so quickly without Todoroki's help. Looking at his friend, he had his eyes in the direction of the sea. While we were on par today on this, I think overall the credit belongs to you, Midoriya. Izuku remained speechless and not believing it at all, but he appreciated his friend's kindness. Also, what I did was an act of relief, more than out of a desire to strengthen myself as a person. In that case, I'm the same way, Midoriya acknowledged. I did what I did today out of the repressed frustration that I had gathered all this time since things haven't gone as I had expected. Izuku was repressing as much as possible the desire to cry, starting for not having developed a quirk and more recently having to abandon my dream of following in All Might's footsteps. Mr. Toshinori clenched his fists very tightly as Midoriya continued. I know that compared to your family problems it is whimsical to think like that. It's not. Todoroki stopped him. If it's your dream, it's just as important. Unable to contain himself any longer, Izuku began to overflow with tears. No, it's not okay that I keep crying all the time. I promise to be stronger so that no one has to worry about me. She began to dry her eyes until she felt Mr. Toshinori's hug. Even if we don't want to admit it, we are all sentimental about something. He then looked at Todoroki. And it's okay to cry. Even heroes do it when they need to. Thank you, I'll remember, Todoroki said, standing up decisively. But first I'll make the one who kidnapped my mother cry. Analyzing that quickly, Deku stood up. Then I'll help you. Uraraka and her new friend were leaving the train at that moment, when by coincidence Bakugo entered carrying a gym bag and seemed in a very bad mood. Uraraka was greatly relieved that he hadn't seen her to call her round face, when suddenly Kami. Hey handsome, don't ruin your beautiful face with that frown. Uraraka was very scared by a possible explosive reaction from Bakugo, but the door closed behind him and the train began to move forward. However, for a fraction of a second, it seemed to Uraraka that the outline of a smile had formed on Bakugo's profile face. What was it about boys' smiles that made them so charming? Uraraka wondered as she remembered Deku smiling. Deku before arriving with Hatsune. Deku laughing in the cafeteria. And then, unexpectedly, Deku falling from the building, but suddenly that Deku was not him, but Himiko Toga's first love, and he was not falling from just any building, but from the roof of the school. She ran and raised her hand to try to touch him before he hit the ground. She preferred to try to do something, rather than do nothing and regret it later, but Uraraka looked away at what had happened. But when she did so, she found the same boy who had just jumped next to her, with his mouth open and unable to believe that he had witnessed his own death. Uraraka woke up rubbing her eyes and couldn't help but feel sad. Toga, although it was still early, Uraraka decided to go for a run to clear her mind. He was following Deku's example, and that simple fact of hers made her feel happy and motivated. The sunlight was beginning to emerge when he reached the beach and saw in the distance Deku practicing with Mr. Toshinori and a boy who must be Todoroki, who he had told him about. Without wanting to interrupt, she remained leaning on the railing, carefully observing how they practiced fighting styles, and it seemed to her that at certain moments Deku shone with the green tones of his eyes and hair against the dawn. Her expression when attacking became unusually fierce and persevering. He felt in the clouds again, as if she floated with her quirk. Despite the short time they had known each other, she felt that she had already seen him in several facets, and seeing him in this new one, she told herself that she also liked Deku in attack mode too much. That expression of determination made him look totally cool. Without worrying much about whether he was blushing, he asked himself, was this what girls in magazines called attraction? Watching that Deku was getting stronger. Maybe when she met him she was too distracted by the resemblance she had to the boy who had obsessed Himiko Toga to notice anything else, but now she felt like she saw Deku 100%. Was this admiration you felt, seeing him grow as a person every day and wanting to be just like him? Or honey, for seeing him at his worst and now seeing him smile again? Or putting it all together, what I was really feeling was love. And what if I talked about this with Deku? The very idea made her feel anxious, and as she breathed she felt that her breath was warm. But would it be the right thing to talk to him about your feelings? Now Deku seemed very focused on finding a new path, after having given up on following in All Might's footsteps, and he didn't want that to be lost. His ability to focus was either as a fanboy who wrote down everything related to the heroes in his notebook, or as someone who practiced non-stop in all of his free time. He didn't want Deku to change at all. Breaking away from the railing, Uraraka decided to continue running in the opposite direction. From the beach, Deku turned in that direction out of a kind of premonition, but he didn't find anyone, and his distraction earned him a blow to the face from Todoroki. Don't get distracted, young Midoriya, Mr. Toshinori scolded. Yeah, Izuku was walking down a busy street making notes in one of his notebooks when he suddenly recognized someone ahead in the crowd and was very happy. Uraraka, wait, Deku shouted when he saw her in a martial arts suit and her hair tied up with a clip. Deku, she turned when he caught up with her. What a surprise to see you. I came from training with Todoroki and Mr. Toshinori. I also come from training. They both shared a smile and continued walking. It caught Deku's attention that the collar of Uraraka's martial arts suit left her neck a little visible. Somehow it looked. She seemed to notice his gaze and turned to look at him. It's a shame that we don't see each other so often anymore, Deku mentioned, somewhat nervous. I think it's been a month since we saw each other. Yes, she acknowledged, lowering her gaze. It's a shame. Is it okay if he ever called you? He asked, playing with her fingers. Although if you're really busy, I would understand. Uraraka stopped walking and Deku got worried. Sorry if I said the wrong thing. It's not like I want to treat you like my girlfriend or something. It's not like I have any intentions with you either, he stuttered, turning redder and redder. I know you're just my friend. Then move over, loser, 𝐭𝐻𝐿 said, pushing him to the ground. Where had it come from? Bakugo, so does this mean? Uraraka asked. Yes, he said, taking her cheek. I turned down all those extras for you, round face. Wait, 𝐭𝐻𝐿, Midoriya shouted. But suddenly he saw himself scrawny, skinny, and in his school uniform. Like when 𝐭𝐻𝐿 had suggested that he jump off the roof. So, 𝐭𝐻𝐿 asked him, intimidating him with his quirk and observing that his own legs were shaking. 𝐭𝐻𝐿's face was getting closer to Uraraka's, but they were interrupted by, everything is fine now. And why? Because I am here, All Might. What are you doing here? 𝐭𝐻𝐿 and Uraraka exclaimed at the same time. Holding hands, Izuku watched him pass by without even noticing him. Your death threat touched my heart, young Bakugo. That's why I have decided to make you my successor. I didn't expect anything less, ha ha ha. Bakugo's evil laugh extended to infinity and Deku felt himself fall into a dark spiral. Then he felt like someone was shaking him. Midoriya, I think you have a nightmare. The first thing he saw when he woke up was Todoroki, already on the street on their way to their morning training. Todoroki and Midoriya walked carrying a pair of shovels. I'm sorry if I woke you up with my nightmare, Midoriya apologized, rubbing his eyes. And thank you for waking me up. You always mutter a little in your sleep, but today you looked a little disturbed, Todoroki explained. Geez, do I always mutter in my sleep? I didn't know that. I hope I didn't say anything embarrassing. You just repeated a name over and over again. What name, 𝐭𝐻𝐿? Midoriya felt discouraged. Don't worry, I haven't been able to sleep much since then anyway. At his words, Deku remembered that since the kidnapping of Todoroki's mother, no one had contacted him to request any type of ransom or to indicate their intentions. The investigation also did not seem to be making much progress at the moment since Endeavor, in all his years as a hero, had amassed too many enemies to suspect. Todoroki seemed very calm, but Deku had a good idea of how he really felt. It had been a month since they had cleaned the beach, and in this time Mr. Toshinori had introduced him to a man who had been a professional hero, known as Gran Torino, who helped him follow a training that at first seemed too extreme. He had gone with them to a rocky area to learn how to climb and do big parkour-like jumps on the weekends. With 𝗧𝗵𝗲's modification to his shoes and knee pads, he was able to build up energy if he repeated push-ups and was able to jump higher than he ever imagined possible. This way, I call you Mr. Toshinori. This is. Midoriya was surprised when he recognized the traces of construction. That's right, it's the bridge that was attacked by Tamura Shigaraki, and we come to investigate. Todoroki guessed, raising his shovel. No, all the information that could be obtained from this place was already documented, Mr. Toshinori answered, looking at the large destroyed space of the bridge. As I told young Midoriya at the time, there are jobs that are not as glamorous as heroes saving people, but community service is necessary for the well-being of society. Even a small bridge can make a big difference in the daily life of a population. Just like the beach they were in charge of cleaning, he is quoting what All Might said a few days ago in an interview Todoroki mentioned, in which he clarified that he has not yet chosen a successor. Caught up in his words, he tried to hide. Did he really say that? It must be that we think the same about it. I didn't know it either. Since I stopped following All Might, I haven't received his notifications, Midoriya reflected. Mr. Toshinori cleared his throat. Anyway, I made a small call for the young people of the community to come and help rebuild the bridge, since the construction company is going through a bad time and little by little it is recovering clients. But this bridge was unfairly left as a stain on his reputation, so this means, Midoriya started to say, but was interrupted. Hello, good morning, Kirishima greeted as he arrived. Next to him came a girl with pink tea and extravagant eyes. I hope we weren't late. Hello, is this where you requested help? Asked a girl with big eyes and green hair, next to a blonde boy with a big tail. Footsteps behind him alerted Midoriya and Todoroki. Thank you very much everyone for coming, it's Uraraka's father. Deku recognized him from when they met at the police station. Izuku Midoriya, I don't think I'll ever thank you enough for saving my daughter, he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. And now you'll help my company. I think I'll always be indebted to you. No, that is not. We agree that Deku is great, said Uraraka, leaving behind the young girl with the appearance of a frog and the boy with a tail. But don't forget that there are other volunteers here too, Dad. I'm sorry, you're right, daughter. Uraraka. Midoriya was happy to see her arrive at her side. This time she had tied her hair in a half ponytail, which suited her very well. Deku tried to smile normally and she responded in the same way. As I was saying, I thank everyone for coming. The foreman will be telling you how you can help at all times. I understand that some of you are practicing to enter the UA Hero course like my daughter, so feel free to use your quirks if you consider it good practice. Just be careful not to hurt anyone in the process. Come on, 𝗧𝗧𝗏 shouted. See, everyone applauded and started moving. Midoriya did his best to keep up while the bags of cement were passed to him next to Todoroki. Out of the corner of his eye he could see what the quirks of each of the workers and volunteers were, and also how they used them in the construction. She already wanted to have a moment to write everything down in a notebook. Could you wait a moment? Said one of the workers. I think we are missing some packages, and I have to call the supplier to confirm that it is not a mistake. They both attended. Deku took advantage of the short break to wipe the sweat from his forehead and instinctively looked for 𝗧𝗧𝗏. He was surely doing something amazing with the zero gravity of it. Is this 𝐒𝐻𝐻? Todoroki asked, pointing to her. Turning, Midoriya saw that she was talking to the blonde boy with a tail, and they seemed to be laughing about something he had said that he couldn't hear. Todoroki could see Midoriya frowning slightly. I don't like getting involved in other people's affairs, but maybe if you talk to her you can sleep better, Todoroki suggested. Midoriya nodded, but just when he was going to take the first step. Ready, the missing packages will arrive tomorrow, the worker announced, resuming work. Thank you all very much. See you tomorrow if you're not too tired, said one of the foremen when it was time for the students to go to school. Thank you very much for having us, Kirishima answered on behalf of those who were leaving. Midoriya looked back expecting to see 𝗧𝗧𝗏 delayed, since she wasn't with them. Although maybe she had stayed a little longer with her father. Hello Midoriya. He was brought out of his thoughts by Kirishima at his side. You know, I invited 𝗵𝘃𝗲 to come, but he said he preferred to go to the gym like normal people. I could have sworn this would be the type of activity he would like. You know, the smell of masculinity is perceived in the air. I think you're not being very fair to us, reproached the young woman with pink hair on the other side. By the way, Mina Ashido called me. I'm sorry. It wasn't intentional, Kirishima justified. I'm Izuku Midoriya. My pleasure. This being the time for introductions. I am 𝗬𝗧𝗏, but if you want you can call me 𝗬𝗏. Nice to meet you, 𝗬. By the way, I liked how you used your quirk today, Kirishima commented. It's easy when you can stick to surfaces. I'm 𝐒𝐻𝐻 𝗵𝐵 and this is Toru Hagakure. Nice to meet you. Everyone blinked twice looking at where 𝗎𝗫𝗏 had pointed. Without being able to resist, 𝗎𝗫𝗏 stopped holding back a small laugh, and curiously a second feminine laugh could be heard. I'm sorry. It's a joke we like to make when we meet new people. For a moment no one understood it. Hagakure is invisible, Midoriya deduced before everyone. 𝗎𝗫𝗏 nodded, laughing again. A while ago we made 𝗧𝗧𝗏 believe that her power was getting out of control, and that she was levitating a bucket that she hadn't even touched. Midoriya remembered when he had looked in his direction and finally understood. He smiled a little, but he felt strange that he was so relieved that the two of them hadn't been laughing alone. But why? Wait, Kirishima suddenly realized. That means you're all the time. Don't even say it. 𝗎𝗫𝗏 stopped him with a slight blush. Of course, clothes have been developed using their hair as raw material to also make them invisible. It doesn't bother me that they think I'm a nudist, clarified the invisible girl. It's a valid assumption, but most of the time I wear visible clothing. Anyway, sorry for thinking that about your girlfriend. It wasn't very gentlemanly, Kirishima apologized very seriously. We're not dating. We've only gone out a couple of times, Hagakure clarified again. But I don't know, you had to tell everyone, 𝗎𝗫𝗏 said, scratching his chin a little. Everyone was a little amused by it all. Midoriya wondered why the boys at their school were too different from them. She felt almost like everyone was already friends and she was so natural. I wish she could be like this every day at school. And by the way, what happened to the other boy who was with you before, Midoriya? Ashido asked. The handsome-looking boy would be. I thought the same too, Hagakure agreed. For her part, 𝗬𝗎 only thought that this boy looked a little like her younger brother, so it was impossible for her to consider him completely handsome. Todoroki had a matter to attend to, and that's why he had to leave early, Midoriya explained. He was a little worried about that, but he was relieved that Mr. Toshinori had accompanied him. In addition to being handsome, he is mysterious. That only makes him more attractive, Ashido said, and the invisible girl seemed to agree again, sharing a few giggles. At that, 𝗎𝗫𝗏 and Kirishima made a gesture like a lost case. Women, well, I think we're parting ways here, Kirishima announced. They all went their separate ways saying goodbye, and Midoriya felt a little discouraged at being left alone. He especially felt disappointed that he hadn't been able to talk to 𝗧𝗧𝗏 after so long. Hey, wait. Deku was surprised and his heart skipped a beat when he recognized the voice, but he tried to hide it. 𝗧𝗧𝗏, I'm sorry, everyone's gone. I think I got too distracted talking to my dad about his new projects. It's hard to stop him when he talks about architecture, but he seems really happy. They both continued walking towards the station, and Deku discreetly looked back and pinched his cheek to convince himself that it wasn't another dream. Something happens. No, by the way, I really liked the volunteers who came today. I had never been in a group of people like that. It's that weird. Deku Uraraka was a little amused without believing it. For me, yes. Midoriya looked at the sky with his eyes somewhat lost. It makes me think that if everyone entered the hero course, they would have a great time together. Uraraka realized the sadness of those words and felt a great urge to comfort him. She tried to remember the decision he had made that day on the beach watching him train, but now she realized that was becoming a lost cause, because what he felt for Deku was overflowing now that she saw him again. Uraraka moved a little closer to him and gently took his hand. Deku, you should try to get into UA. Midoriya immediately felt as if an old wound in his chest was opening up. She had to admit that she had constantly found herself thinking about how she would approach the UA entrance exam if she tried it. But having someone like Uraraka say it out loud to him made it all too real. But I promised my mom. Uraraka shook her head. I know she will understand, he assured her. I know she won't let you give up on your true dream. I really would like to continue meeting people like today, Midoriya reflected with a slight smile. And I would be very happy to study with you and see you every day, saying that without thinking. It only took a second for Uraraka to start blushing, and she wanted to let go of Deku's hand, but this time he decisively took hers by the wrist. He also seemed surprised by his own reaction, which seemed rather instinctive. Forgive me, Deku began to say, but without letting go, and Uraraka's heart felt more and more turbulent. Uraraka. They both looked into each other's eyes and saw their mutual confusion with a blush. I can't believe you forgot the science project at construction. Now we're going to be late, Ashido complained coming down the stairs of the station. But Midoriya and Uraraka are still here. It shouldn't be that late. They both reacted very scared, as if their hands were burning, and they separated immediately. But it's almost 9, Ashido wondered, looking at his watch. It's too late, Uraraka acknowledged. Yes, too late, Midoriya agreed. They both ran up the stairs of the station at full speed, separating in the two different directions of the train. What's happening to them now? Kirishima asked, and Ashido smiled, slightly amused. Mr. Toshinori walked alongside Todoroki, entering the police station. He looked at his worried expression out of the corner of his eye, and although he wanted to tell her that everything would be fine, he knew in advance that many things could happen during a kidnapping. I hope it's good news about my mother. They are good investigators, including your father. However, as soon as All Might said it, the ground began to shake and the door they were heading to burned in red flames, completely disintegrating it. It's not true. I absolutely refuse to believe it, Endeavor shouted angrily. I know how to recognize my quirk, and I know that Shoto's power is mine. They both ran in their direction and saw Endeavor in front of Hawks and the police chief on the other side. What's wrong? Is it something related to my mother? She hurriedly asked, alarmed. Todoroki, don't tell me that. No, calm down, Hawks asked. We haven't located her yet, but we discovered information that could be related to her kidnapping. Endeavor growled, baring his teeth. In turn, Todoroki looked at him with complete contempt. They found information that could help find Mom, and your first reaction is to scream. Stupid old man. Shoto was about to attack him with his firepower, but Mr. Toshinori's hand on his wrist stopped him. No, let's first hear what the information is. The priority is to locate your mother, he tried to reassure him. Shoto, although still annoyed, nodded. As some of you know, I have personally been investigating the whereabouts of Tamura Shigaraki, Hawks began to explain, to confirm if All for One had a plan for Shigaraki in case he ever returned to their side. And he had it, Toshinori asked. I found something very interesting, he said, handing him some plans and records. I'm sorry, but what does this have to do with my mother? Shoto asked. As you know, All for One had a large number of followers who did not hesitate to give him all their assets. However, towards the end during his fall, those resources were not enough, and I found that Dr. Kyudai Garaki had been financing part of his research, offering a service to implant quirks to newborns from families with high purchasing power. And in the records we found an authorization signed by your mother, he said, handing him a form that Shoto received with great surprise. The quirk implantation he authorized was a fire quirk, Hawks said at Endeavor's furious look, but tried to ignore it. Do you think your mother would have been desperate enough to give Endeavor a descendant with a combination of quirks to consent? This, Shoto immediately remembered his mother's anguished face while she was talking on the phone, shortly before throwing the boiling water at him. Yes, quite a bit. He probably would have done what was necessary to ensure that he would no longer have to bring more children into this world in vain, Shoto acknowledged, and for the first time Endeavor's look changed to one of dismay. Closing his eyes, Hawks sighed. Okay, maybe the person who kidnapped your mother is someone who somehow knows this and is trying to expose it as some kind of dirty campaign against Endeavor, but it's still just a guess. Shoto continued, looking at one of his hands. Does this mean that my fire quirk belonged to one of All for One's followers? More or less, said Hawks, taking a sip from his cup of coffee, which from his expression had been too hot. But a quirk that has already manifested could not be implanted into a newborn. Their body would not resist it, Toshinori reflected. Dr. Kyudai Garaki developed abominable but very advanced technology, the police chief tried to justify. Maybe he found a way. Shoto immediately realized that they were hiding something. If there is still something you are not telling me, I ask you to tell me. I agree. Personally, I don't trust you at all, 𝗵𝗃 almost shouted. Hawk sighed in resignation. I guess that's what happens to me for playing my role as a double agent too well. And of course you can review the investigation, 𝗵𝗃, he said, showing him the stack of papers on the desk. As for whether we withheld information, there is only one thing left to say. But of course, again, it's just an assumption that would be difficult to verify. I want to hear it. Shoto accepted. We believe that quirks in newborns are something potential like a seed that has not germinated, so they would have to take the potential from one baby to put it in another. Shoto's face saddened a little, wondering if his mother would have known that by agreeing to have a fire quirk given to him, taking it away from another baby, knowing in advance about the small number of carriers of a fire quirk. That narrowed it down to children born in the same year with at least one parent with that quirk, who therefore would not have manifested it. Shoto frowned, hoping that wasn't what he was suddenly thinking. When entering those filters, the computer only returned one name, and I think you know him, Mr. Toshinori, he said, handing him a sheet of paper with the name Izuku Midoriya. Bakugo worked out on an ARM machine, letting his most violent thoughts motivate him. It started with the useless Deku, who seemed to have more and more confidence in himself, but it was clear that he could still crush him like a worm whenever he wanted. She was just a small pebble in his path that he didn't have to worry about too much. That's what he thought, crushing Deku's head between the armrests of the machine in his imagination. Then there was that other sophomore at UA. He might take a little more time, but he was already looking forward to the chance to make a fool of him and prove that he wasn't even close to being number one. He imagined punching that idiot's face on the punching bag, and of course he didn't forget that guy who had dared to make fun of him at the school entrance. She had the worst punishment in store for him, she thought, smiling maliciously. On the treadmill she imagined running after him, using the explosions in his hands as momentum and seeing the terror in his eyes. Suddenly the light in the gym began to flicker and went off. Hey, there are still people here, Bakugo shouted angrily. Sorry, looks like there was a power outage, a staff member shouted. Damn, Bakugo complained. A boy who had also been on the treadmills walked over to where a lamp illuminated the fuse box. If you want, I can help, he said, pointing to himself. Oh really? Asked the manager, not very convinced. I already checked and there is no damage to the fuses. It just seems like the power went out, but I don't understand why the emergency generator didn't activate. I can give it electricity. Not to brag, but I have great control of my electrical quirk. I even have the goal of entering the UA. Bakugo watched intently with a frown. Maybe more rivals would continue to appear if he didn't pay enough attention. Todoroki was walking with a determined air towards the beach, and something about that was starting to worry Toshinori, who was behind him a lot. I know you're a good friend, young Todoroki, Toshinori began, passing by an illuminated lamppost. And you think you should tell young Midoriya about Hawk's assumptions. But keep in mind that what's done cannot be undone. If it turns out to be true, Todoroki stopped dead with an expression of frustration and anger. And to think that being a hero was Midoriya's dream, and my family took it away from him because of my father's ambition to defeat All Might, he said, punching the post. I would understand if Midoriya doesn't want to talk to me again after this. I highly doubt it. I think you know young Midoriya's kind nature well, she tried to reassure him. Besides, it's not something you could have decided, and I think he'll understand if you decide to tell him. The light on the post flickered a little, perhaps because of the hit Todoroki had given it. I've noticed for a while that you have a particular interest in Midoriya. That's why I want to ask you now. All Might swallowed heavily. Are you Midoriya's secret father or something? All Might was able to breathe again. No, we're linked that way. I'm just his coach. But he is someone very important, Todoroki reflected. I could tell that both my father and Hawks have great trust in him to talk about police matters that are normally secret, and Hawks also allowed him to review what he found regarding Ulfr's plans. One for Tamura Shigaraki. If I had to guess, I would say that you are hiding your true identity from Midoriya. I didn't think you were paying so much attention, young Todoroki, she said, looking at him with a serious look. It's part of being 𝗵𝗃's son, she said, turning to look directly at him. So you'll tell me who you really are? Mr. Toshinori lowered his head, then gave a small smile, and the light on the pole went out at that moment. Uraraka stared into space, not realizing that Tsuyu had been watching her for some time as she walked beside her. Uraraka's mind replayed the moment she had seen Deku's beautiful green eyes and what seemed like a slight blush. Achako, Tsuyu called her. You know I always say what I think. Yes, I've noticed. She laughed a little uncomfortably. That's why I'll tell you that. I think you like Midoriya. And that you're thinking about him right now. Uraraka touched both cheeks with her palms and therefore began to float. Wait, I'm not finished yet, Tsuyu said, holding her ankle with her tongue to lower her back to the ground. Uraraka covered her face, careful to leave her pinkies out this time. So it's true. It is so obvious. Not so much. But I've seen you for a while in martial arts class. Normally you're very focused. But the person I saw today at the construction site wasn't even close to the same. You were making a lot of mistakes, and the whole time it was because you were looking in the same direction. While the most obvious assumption would have been that you like Midoriya's friend, since he somehow stands out more, I think you're not the type of person to be impressed by the exterior, and Midoriya certainly seems more your type. Uraraka continued to cover her face. I didn't say it to make you uncomfortable. I was just curious to know when you will tell him and end all this. Uraraka finally uncovered her face, and she seemed a little discouraged. I won't tell him. He's going through a lot and needs to focus on his own goals, and I wouldn't want to distract him with my feelings. That seems very noble, you think? But tell me, what will you do if someone less noble arrives, who also notices Midoriya and decides whether to express his feelings to him before you? Uraraka froze. I can see from your expression that you hadn't thought about that possibility. I promise not to get involved from now on, since I'm not normally like that. But I just wanted you to realize that this seems to be affecting you and that someone could get hurt in the construction if you don't learn to cope well with your feelings. Uraraka was still blushing until she tried to divert attention. Look, it's 𝐭𝐸𝐵, she said, greeting her friend who, by coincidence, was walking in the opposite direction but on the other side at the patron's crossing. She looked a little surprised but ended up waving her hand in response with a smile. So you watched that with interest. Are they your friends, 𝐭𝐸𝐵? Asked the tall, burly boy next to him as they continued on their way. I had never seen the one who greeted me today in my life, but I think I had seen the one on the side before, and that's why I greeted them. But it's not like I know her name or anything like that. Wow. You greet complete strangers on the street. I definitely have a lot to learn from you about social skills, 𝐭𝐸𝐵. The boy almost shouted in an exaggeratedly enthusiastic way. Midoriya trained his kicks alone on the darkened beach. It was strange, but neither Mr. Toshinori nor Todoroki had contacted him since the morning, and he had begun to worry. At that moment, an incoming call appeared on his phone, and he answered without verifying who it was. Yeah, hello, Deku. Uraraka. Hello, he said, getting nervous for some reason. How are you? Are you okay? Yes, he answered and left a small amount of time to continue. I'm sorry, I know you must be training. Maybe it's better if I call later. Something happens? She asked, feeling a little worried. And if it's because of the training, don't worry, I have my hands free and I can continue while I listen to you. It's good to know that I'm not interrupting you, and yes, I'm fine. I just wanted to continue talking to you. Deku couldn't help but blush a little. It was the first time a girl called him on the phone at night, and somehow she felt too personal. Like a married couple who talks in bed before going to sleep. Damn, he cursed himself for thinking that scenario, because he imagined him and Uraraka in it. Deku, oh yeah, she said, trying to recover from the shock. And how was your day? Oh, me. Well, as you know, I went to school and they gave me a penalty for being late. Me too. Deku laughed a little, starting to relax. That's how it is. I have to stay calm and focused so that Uraraka doesn't think something strange about me, he said to himself, resuming his kicking exercise and some dodging exercises. Then I went to my martial arts class. I think today you met Tsuyu, who takes classes with me, and Ajiro, who lends his family's place for classes. Yes, I found his quirks very interesting. I think you just need to meet my friend 𝐭𝐸𝐵. She's very nice, but sometimes she does or says very daring things I don't think to 𝐭𝐸𝐵's level. It would be very strange for a girl. Ah, that reminds me that the other day we met Bakugo on the train, and you won't believe what he said to him. Hey handsome, don't ruin your beautiful face with that frown. Midoriya almost lost his balance. And how did he come out of that alive? I've seen 𝐭𝐸𝐵 yell at even elderly women. Well, believe it or not, I thought I saw Bakugo smiling. So 𝐭𝐸𝐵 likes that kind of expressions from girls, Deku reflected. He would never have imagined it. There was a short interval before Uraraka asked, and you, Deku, what kind of things do you like girls to say to you? Deku became very nervous again. Well, it would be hard to say if other girls talked to him. If someone told you. Deku felt his cheeks and ears turn red with anticipation. I think you're very cute, Uraraka said softly, and let a few seconds pass before continuing. Would that make any impression on you? Deku turned red as a tomato and had to cover his mouth and nose to try to breathe properly. Don't worry, he's not telling you. It's just a casual question. But he couldn't help but imagine Uraraka in front of him, saying those words to him with her hair blowing in the wind. He was finally able to breathe well, calm down, and found himself feeling very happy, although his cheeks were burning. Why yeah, that would definitely make me smile. That's good to know. Deku got the impression that Uraraka had also gotten nervous about asking him that, and somehow that made him smile too. I think it's time for me to take a bath. See you tomorrow. See you tomorrow. They both hung up at the same time, and Deku looked at the sea moving gently. He let the breeze ruffle his hair a little. Why hadn't he realized before how nice it was to be there at night? It's true, I must continue training, he said to himself, resuming his exercises. It was another day at construction. Midoriya bent down to pick up a roll of rods from the ground, and as he stood up, he accidentally collided with Uraraka, who was next to her. They both looked away nervously so as not to see eye to eye. And have you heard anything about Todoroki? Uraraka asked, receiving the rods, making sure that her hands did not touch by mistake and levitating them to where Asui received them with his tongue. He told me by message that yesterday had been a long day and that he had a lot of things to think about, but he invited me to dinner at his house today after school. He said he had something to tell me, which may be. Uraraka wondered. It couldn't be more mysterious. For a moment Midoriya remembered that Ishido and Hagakure had mentioned that about Todoroki as well. Bakugo, what a miracle to see you here, Kirishima exclaimed upon receiving him at the entrance to the building. Shut up. I only came here because some moron with electrical powers ruined the gym equipment with his quirk last night. Well, it doesn't matter, he said, pointing to where Ishido was. If you want, you can start helping us by moving the mixture over there. And how the hell will that help me exercise? Don't complain so much, she said, pushing him. Hey, get your hands off me. What a peculiar boy. But together they seemed like a comical duo, Asui mentioned, and in a slight oversight some of the rods began to slip. Realizing this, Midoriya flexed his legs, took a big jump and managed to catch them in the air and then leave them up on the construction. You do have good reflexes, Asui was impressed. Midoriya blushed a little at being praised. Well done, Deku, Uraraka encouraged him from below. Well done, Midoriya, Kirishima said, instantly noticing the displeasure on Bakugo's face next to him. No, not again, hey moron. How did you do that? As far as I knew you didn't have any quirks, and a normal person doesn't jump 5 meters. What? No quirk? I've seen him using it today and yesterday, Ishido mentioned, surprised. So do I, Asui said. Have you been making fun of me? Bakugo shouted more excitedly, going in his direction. I swear not, Kachin. She tried to explain Midoriya as she watched him climb a rope. I only use engineering tools to help me. That's what your grandmother believes, Deku, she said, quickly approaching him and throwing a punch. With great agility, Midoriya dodged it. He read my movements, Bakugo thought with a spasm. He's imitating that other unfortunate man. To his surprise, he not only dodged it, but using his arm as leverage, he turned him around to throw him to the ground on his back. This damn pebble. You always start on the right, Kachin, Midoriya explained, somewhat agitated. By the way, I wrote that down in the notebook you threw out the window that time. Good move, Ajiro said, reaching out to the others who were watching below. But shouldn't we stop them? This isn't the right place to practice. Bakugo growled. What are you trying to damn Deku? As I told you before, I will no longer allow you to hit me, Kachin, and as far as I'm concerned, the Deku of your insults now means you can do it. Uraraka was very happy at his words. Being closer and still on the ground, Bakugo observed the strange shoes, knee pads, and gloves that Deku was wearing. He wondered if there was any truth to what he had told her earlier and was concentrating on that. But, I hope you're not hurt, Kachin. Are you okay? Midoriya offered him his hand to get up, and in Bakugo's eyes that was all too familiar to a childhood memory that he held rather distastefully. I don't want you to do that again, not even once. You hear? Do what? Midoriya asked strangely, taking a step back as she watched him rise menacingly. Believing I'm weak, Bakugo shouted, lunging forward, knocking him to the ground and then hitting him square in the face. That was enough for Deku's patience to give way. I've never thought you were weak, Deku shouted, also punching him in the face. In case you haven't noticed, I've always wanted to be like you, except when you're a damn idiot. Bakugo reacted by pulling him by the shirt and they both struggled. Why do not you die? Bakugo yelled at him. You should think before you speak, idiot. Idiot, Deku almost yelled with 2 more punches. Look who's talking. You're the one who started all this with that. Are you okay? At 4 years old when I fell off that damn bridge, he yelled at him, pulling him even more, and Deku tried with all his might to free himself from him until he decided to kick him. Just for that reason you tormented me for years, he yelled under his breath, trying to remove Bakugo's hand that was still holding him. Is that not enough? She growled, letting go of his shirt and now trying to slam him to the ground, grabbing his face with the entire palm of her hand. Likewise, Midoriya was trying to push him with his foot and put pressure on his arm. They continued struggling until they were about to fall from the construction. Everyone prepared to do something, but in the end it was Asui who was able to save them by rolling them both up with his tongue. It really seems like you guys have serious issues to resolve, he said, taking a big leap and placing them on the ground. What's going on here? Uraraka's father asked, arriving at the scene. Seeing Bakugo and Midoriya on the ground, he called them both to talk. So you won't be able to return to construction, Todoroki concluded next to him at the table. If we can continue going under warning not to fight anymore. They also called our houses to report what we had done. Midoriya's face was still a little swollen, and that's why he had to explain part of what happened. But why does that Kachin girl want to hit you? Todoroki's sister asked. Couldn't it be that she likes you? Midoriya realized that he had never clarified that to Todoroki. An explanation later. Mayumi was laughing a little. Sorry, I think I didn't understand my brother very well then. More like I think I was the one who understood everything wrong, Todoroki admitted. Midoriya took the first bite of his plate and smiled. "It's delicious, I'm glad you like it," said Mayumi, returning the smile. "I'll pass on your congratulations to my brother Natsuo. Today he stayed at a friend's house to study for his final exams. But he left dinner ready since we took turns doing it. Do you cook too, Todoroki?" He looked away grimly. "Let's just say it's not one of his strong points," Mayumi mentioned and laughed a little again. Midoriya noticed how Todoroki watched his sister with some affection when he saw her laugh. However, their expression changed radically when the front door announced that someone else had arrived. "I thought Dad would be on night duty today," Todoroki's sister said, somewhat upset. A few seconds later, Midoriya saw 𝗵𝗃 enter. Although he was not wearing his hero suit, his presence was extremely imposing. "Gee, good night," Midoriya greeted. "Welcome home, Dad," said Mayumi. 𝗵𝗃 looked at them all for a moment and then turned around. "Let's talk for a moment, Shoto," he said, walking down the hallway of the house. Midoriya watched a rather annoyed Todoroki get up from the table. "Excuse me for a moment," he said, leaving and closing the dining room door behind him. Midoriya looked down a little. "Maybe I should come back another time. I wouldn't want to bother you." "No, please. My brother said he had something important to talk to you about," said Mayumi, sitting next to him at the table. "I know that the tension between my father and Shoto is easy to perceive and can be scary, but I ask you not to stop talking. Being my brother's friend, I think it has done him a lot of good to have someone to talk to," he said, taking both of his hands, to which Midoriya smiled and nodded as he felt the warmth of his feelings. "I won't do it." 𝗵𝗃 had his back in front of the desk in his home study and turned in profile towards his son. "Is that him? The one Hawks mentioned, Izuku Midoriya?" Yeah, Todoroki waited for his father to continue with what he had to tell him and watched him sit down. "So far I have not been able to disprove her theory. Your mother's signature on the document she showed us is definitely hers. But I ask you to assume that she is wrong and not tell anyone about these absurd assumptions for now." "Absurd?" Todoroki questioned. "Are you saying that because your pride still doesn't want to believe that my power is not yours?" His father frowned. "Yes, I heard you very clearly at the police station, but I will tell you that any quirk will take the form you want if you subject it to years and years of relentless training. I did it for your own good, Shoto. For my sake. When you are a hero, everything will be easier for you. And have you even asked yourself if I don't want to be a hero?" His father gave him that look they both shared, and Todoroki did the same. "Wow, it seems like the arguments never end in this house," said a voice that they both recognized instantly. When they turned around, they saw on the studio computer the kidnapper sitting in an armchair and showing himself as he really was, with a large number of scars on his face and arms. "I think we were in a similar situation last time, although I didn't have a chance to introduce myself. You can call me 𝗬𝗲," he said, smiling at them. "And no, it's not a recording if that's what you think. This is a direct broadcast, courtesy of one of my collaborators with the quirk to transmit to any computer in the world. And luckily it works for both sides. That's why we can also see them. And by we, of course I also mean her." The image changed, and as if she were watching them from a living room television, Todoroki was sitting in an armchair and began to cry, covering her mouth when she saw them. "Mother," afterwards, although it seemed that she was speaking, it was not possible to hear what she was saying. "Where the hell do you have it?" 𝗵𝗃 demanded to know. "What are you going to do to him?" The kidnapper responded with a mocking laugh, returning to the screen. "You should not worry about her integrity. I will take care of her as if she were my own mother." "What the hell do you want?" Todoroki asked. 𝗬𝗲 gave a half smile. "All I want is to help." That answer and the way he said it made them both uneasy. "As I see it, the central problem with this matter is that 𝗵𝗃 did not know how to balance his hero work well with his family life. And by failing to be number one, he passed that responsibility on to his children. Very poorly done. And how does that affect you?" Shoto reproached him quite angrily. "Or of course it affects me. And a lot," he said, leaning back further in his chair. "I was thinking a lot about this matter, about how to solve this conflict, and I realized that if 𝗵𝗃 finally fulfills its dream of being number one, it would no longer have he had to pressure Shoto to do it, and then he could finally focus on being a good father to all his children." 𝗵𝗃 growled under his breath in response. "I believe in you, 𝗵𝗃. I have always believed that you have the necessary power and that you only needed motivation to achieve it. That is why I was forced to do this very theatrical kidnapping," he said, already reclining in his chair and continuing with the second act. "I want," he began to say as the computer image changed to that of a forest with signs of having once caught fire, "that you take All Might's lifeless body to this place. I know you recognize it well, and if not, you would disappoint me very much." Todoroki turned to see his father, and from his expression he knew that he did recognize him. "And to put just a little pressure, I'll give you a month," he said again, sitting on the couch. "Otherwise, they will find Todoroki's body instead. Ha ha ha, damn deranged monster." Todoroki yelled at him, and 𝗬𝗲 stopped laughing but kept an amused smile. "The only monster here is the one who prefers to remain a hero at the expense of the integrity of his own family," he said very seriously towards the screen before ending the transmission. Deku stopped carving one of the plates and dropped it back into the soapy water. 𝐒𝐽 he said with his hands shaking. Are you okay, Midoriya? Deku finally reacted. Are you okay? You're the one who's experiencing all these terrible things, she said, looking at him with great concern. Todoroki picked up the plate that had sunk in the water again. Although things couldn't be worse, it is a relief that you have finally communicated to express your demands. That gives us clues to continue with the investigation, Todoroki reflected coldly. And we were able to corroborate that for now my mother is still alive. He concluded by putting the freshly washed plate on the drain board. Midoriya looked at him in shock and then with regret. You've always seemed that way to me, Todoroki, but now more than ever I admire your ability to stay calm in such a demanding situation. I don't think I could ever do it, Midoriya reflected, lowering his head a little. If this happened to you it wouldn't be the same, Todoroki assured. The relationship you have with your mother is much closer than the one I have with mine. I spent many years without seeing her, and although I'm worried, I can't say that I know what kind of person he really is, especially after finding out what he could have done terribly. Something terrible. That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. The kitchen door opening interrupted him. Sorry, can I continue with the dishes, Shoto? I was just talking to Natsuo on the phone, said Mayumi, entering the kitchen and then looking surprised. Midoriya. Are you staying the night? Because the last train will leave soon, she asked, looking your watch. No, I'll stop talking to my mom for fighting at the construction site after coming to see you, or they won't allow me to return, Midoriya said angrily. Do you think this can wait at least until tomorrow? Without wanting to, Todoroki remembered that his father had also asked him to wait. Now that he thought about it, had he been too quick to accept Hawk's theory just as an unconscious gesture of wanting to distance himself further from any connection that united him with his father? Was I being just as stubborn as him? If it can wait, Todoroki finally stated seriously. A few moments later they were seeing Midoriya off at the entrance as he ran down the path towards the station. Thank you very much for everything, he said goodbye, waving his hand. Thank you for coming. And don't forget what you promised, Mayumi shouted. I won't do it. That promised? Todoroki asked him. His sister just laughed a little, going back inside the house. So you've been bothering the poor quirkless boy again. What the hell is wrong with you? How hard do I have to spank you to make you understand? As if you could really spank me, you deluded woman. Actually, it seemed to all of us that it was Bakugo who took the most hits, Kirishima mentioned, eating a cookie. Shut up. And who the hell let you into my house? Bakugo yelled, pushing the plate of cookies out of his reach. I invited him. You should realize what a good friend you have and invite him more often, said his mother, sighing tiredly. I guess tomorrow morning I'll have to call the doctor to increase your dose and try to lower your testosterone again. Then he smiled a little. Now tell me a little more about how my son got his ass kicked. True, ma'am. The only butt kicked here will be yours. I'm sorry for the delay. A lot of things happened, Midoriya said as he entered his house, and without expecting it he was greeted by a hug, followed by a general scrutiny from his mother. What's wrong? Izuku, he said, checking her face and arms, noticing the scratches and her slightly swollen eye. Did you really get into a fight today? Why, yes. His mother turned around and began to speak in a low voice. Oh dear, I thought maybe it was a mistake. You've always been so good that I don't know how I should react. At first I thought I should call you out, but surely what you did was for a good reason or in self-defense. On the other hand, I don't want it to become something common and downplay its importance. Izuku smiled when he saw where he got his habit of mumbling from. Maybe we could take advantage of this to talk. His mother nodded and they both took a seat at the dining room table. Lying on his bed, Deku held his cell phone to his cheek and looked up at the darkened ceiling of his room. And did your mother scold you? Uraraka asked from the phone receiver. No, and she didn't punish me either, he said, placing an ice pack on her eye. The first thing I told her was that whoever I fought with was Kachin, and she immediately assumed it was just self-defense. But that's true, although Kachin was the one who started the fight. To be totally honest, I've wanted to fight him for a long time. Don't get me wrong, though, Uraraka. Despite what happened before, I don't hold any grudge against Kachin, for it's just that, now that I've gotten a little stronger, a part of me wanted to check if the gap between us was still too big or if it had narrowed even just a little. I see. And how do you feel now? Better. During the fight I was able to express my intention to reach him, and in turn I was able to understand Kachin a little more. He told me that he does not want to be treated as if he were weak and that it bothered him that I offered him help, but it all started when they were only 4 years old. Shouldn't Bakugo be over it by now? It sounds pretty immature, right? But listening to it and thinking about it calmly afterwards, it made me understand that I too have felt a little that way because of something my mother said at that same age. Deku replayed the scene in his mind. When I was 4 years old and the doctor told me that I should give up on my idea of becoming a hero, and then at home I asked my mom if I could still be like All Might. She started crying and told me that I felt. Midoriya closed his eyes. Those were the words I least wanted to hear at that moment. It was as if he was asking me to give up and at the same time as if he felt sorry for me. That's why I don't think I could downplay it now. What bothered 𝐭𝐚𝐲 in the first place? But it wasn't something you said consciously. I guess it was because you sincerely cared about him. I told my mom the same thing when I told her all this, since it was not my intention to make her feel bad after so long. Deku removed the ice from his eye with some pain and turned on his side on the bed. Then I said that I wanted to try to take the exam to enter the UA, and he told me that he would support me from now on. I was very happy for you, Deku. So I was right. Deku smiled a little, although he reacted suddenly. I'm sorry. I think you've been talking about me for a long time. I must be boring you. Not at all. These stories of rivalries between boys are as interesting as if I were reading them straight from a manga. You two would definitely be the protagonists. Deku figured that. Haha, you are very cute, 𝗧𝗧𝗏. Oh, in a second the discomfort between the two was palpable, even though they were not physically in the same place, and Midoriya cursed himself again for thinking and feeling too compromising a sensation between the two of them. It's like we're lying together, he thought, blushing like crazy. At what point had he gone to bed talking to 𝗧𝗧𝗏 on the phone? Was he too distracted not to notice? And most importantly, was he enjoying that discomfort in some way now? He shook his head vigorously, sitting on the bed. You too. You're very cute, Deku, 𝗧𝗧𝗏 replied softly, and then Midoriya felt a terrible crush in his heart. Now I was telling him. His hands began to shake and he accidentally dropped the phone. When I accidentally tried to pick it up again, she hung up the call. At that he went completely white, making the pose of the scream painting. No, I had to call him again, she said to herself as she managed to recover a little from the shock, until she saw a new message from 𝗧𝗧𝗏. You must be tired. See you tomorrow. Rest. See you tomorrow, and I'm sorry, he responded immediately. Now more calmly, he put the cell phone next to his pillow and lay down on his side. But something inside him continued to bother him. Would it be possible for him to sleep now that he was feeling so anxious? Completely blushing and in her pajamas, 𝗧𝗧𝗏 pressed her cell phone at the height of her chest. Deku. It was a new day at the beach and 𝗧𝗧𝗏 had Deku in front of her. I'm glad you agreed to come earlier. Now we will see the result of our training, 𝗧𝗧𝗏 announced, placing her feet in position on the sand. You're mixed fighting style against my martial arts, and I don't want you to have special considerations for me just because we are friends or because I'm a girl. Deku, a few steps away, also got into position, his gaze full of determination. Understood. No considerations. Dawn was their scene. The waves were turbulent and the wind was gentle and pleasant. 𝗧𝗧𝗏 started the fight with a punch and a flying kick that were easily blocked by him. But it didn't come as a complete surprise. Deku pushed her with both palms on her chest. 𝗧𝗧𝗏 tried to hide a small blush as best she could and attacked him again. It didn't take her long to notice that Deku was only trying to block her and push her away. You're not attacking me. I said no considerations for being friends. Think about fighting with Bakugo. She reproached him, trying to hit him again, but Deku dodged her and started attacking her. One attack after another. It was very fast and 𝗧𝗧𝗏 felt her feet recoil in the sand, but she tried to keep her balance. She then tried to punch him with her fist. But Deku used the same move he had used on Bakugo and knocked her onto her back. Why hadn't I seen it coming? It's okay. You win, Deku, he acknowledged, raising his thumb. I can't believe it. You're too fast. Shaken from the fight and still lying in the sand, she saw Deku leaning over her, keeping the length of his arms between the two of them, and she couldn't help but blush more. 𝗧𝗧𝗏, he also said, catching his breath and with a look that made him look super attractive in 𝗧𝗧𝗏's eyes. Since it is without considerations, I must confess that I do not consider you just a friend as you said a few moments ago. Although embarrassed, 𝗧𝗧𝗏 couldn't help but laugh a little. That sentence was a bit forced, but I understand you, Deku, she said, trying to look him straight into his pretty green eyes. I don't think of you just as a friend either. 𝗧𝗧𝗏 watched him lean a little closer and she closed her eyes. However, he waited for several seconds without anything happening, having to open his eyes again. To her surprise, Deku was still watching her with a very focused expression. No considerations, he said, taking off his shirt. Deku, what are you doing? I won't have any consideration for you, he said, getting dangerously close, squeezing one of her breasts. 𝗧𝗧𝗏 then she gave him the hardest punch she could to smash Deku's entire face in. In reality, 𝗧𝗧𝗏 hit herself in the face with a closed fist and woke up in the darkness of her room. No, she thought, shaking her head with her hands on her cheeks and still blushing. Deku is the cutest of the cutest and most innocent. He would never do something like that. Then she hit herself on the head. That wasn't nice. Not nice at all. Midoriya felt something strange. She knew that he was still lying in her bed and she sensed that it was still night, but she couldn't move or open her eyes. It was probably one of those sleep paralysis that she had already experienced on some other occasion. She knew it was only a matter of time before she could move again, so she waited. A while passed and suddenly he felt the weight of a person on him. Despite what is popularly said, this presence was warm and pleasant. He climbed under his covers as if he had always been there. Deku. He couldn't open his eyes, but somehow he knew it was 𝗧𝗧𝗏, and that she was climbing from his stomach to the height of his chest, where his heart rate was increasing. Deku. He knew his face and body were getting hot, and again he felt 𝐒𝐴𝐴𝐴's weight escalating, now hugging her head against his chest. You're very good looking. Oh no, what was this? A fantasy in the midst of paralysis. I had to do something. It wasn't good. He still couldn't move, and he stayed like that for a while, feeling 𝐒𝐴𝐴𝐴's chest against his face burning. Then she felt 𝐒𝐴𝐴𝐴's body settle sideways on his outstretched right arm, and she was actually trying to move even just the tips of her fingers, but it was very difficult. After a while, half asleep and with great effort, he was able to turn his body to the right, but a bit of the fantasy and paralysis continued. 𝐒𝐴𝐴𝐴's body was pressed against his, especially at the hip, and the back of his head was right under his nose. It smelled very good. It was like they were lying together. He knew those thoughts had been on his mind, so he wasn't going to pretend that this fantasy had come out of nowhere. Letting himself go just a little, he imagined hugging 𝐒𝐴𝐴𝐴 around the hip, buried his nose in her neck, and soon fell asleep again.